I did. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. I want to welcome you and let you know that the meeting has come to order. This is the regular meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee. My name is Malia Cohen. I'm the chair of this committee. And to my right, who will be joining us shortly, is Supervisor Scott Wiener, who is the vice chair. And to my left is Supervisor Peskin. Our clerk is Miss Elisa Samara. I'd like to thank Phil Jackson and Jim Smith from SFGov TV for broadcasting this meeting. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements?
Yes, please make sure to silence all cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the March 1st Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
All right, thank you very much. Could you please call item number 1?
Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to allow projecting business signs in the Fillmore Street Neighborhood Commercial Transit District with certain requirements and restrictions.
Okay. Fantastic. Today we have Connor Johnston from President Breed's office here to present on this item. Mr. Johnston, thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. Good afternoon, supervisors. This legislation is a planning code change to allow marquee business signs on certain buildings in the Fillmore Neighborhood Commercial Transit District, or NCT. The Board of Supervisors unanimously supported President Breed's NCT legislation last year, and she thanks her colleagues for that. This legislation will make one small change, allowing a business in buildings of 3 or more stories to display a vertical sign higher than what was currently allowed, as long as it does not interfere with architectural features or rise above residential windows or above the roof line or above 60 feet, whichever is lowest. There are only a handful of businesses that meet these criteria, and the obvious example is the Fillmore Auditorium, which is a longtime neighborhood-defining entertainment venue. This legislation will allow the auditorium to provide signage that is more appropriate both for the size and scale of its building and for its location adjacent to Geary. In the days of urban freeways and the redevelopment agency, the 4-lane Geary Expressway divided the Fillmore and Japantown neighborhoods apart in a ruthless effort to funnel as many cars through as possible. Having larger marquee venue signs along Geary will help signify Fillmore and Japantown as more than just places to pass by, but as the cultural destinations that they are, and will help visually and symbolically bridge the gap created by the Geary Expressway. A larger sign for the Fillmore Auditorium will help brand the neighborhood as the Fillmore, similar to how the Castro Theater, and we have its supervisor here today, similar to how the Castro Theater has branded the Castro. So on behalf of President Breed, I would ask for your support and happy to answer any questions, and I believe Aaron Starr from Planning is here to speak on this as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Starr.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs for the Planning Department. The Planning Commission heard this item on December 17th of last year and voted unanimously to recommend approval with modifications. The Commission's proposed modifications include requiring the sign to imply a remote transformer and that the sign is designed with a minimum profile to be narrow as structurally feasible. Require the sign to have an indirect means of illumination during business hours, such as reverse halo lit lettering, and limit the proposed sign to one per building and only for the primary occupant of the building. The Department and the Commission thank Supervisor Breed for incorporating our amendments into the ordinance before you today, and that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Mr. Johnston, is that it on your part? Fantastic. Well, colleagues, if there's any questions, we can take them now. None? Okay, let's go ahead and open up for public comment on this item. Public comment is open to any member of the public that would like to speak on item number 1. You'll have 2 minutes. All right, seeing none, public comment is closed. Thank you.
I'll make a motion to send this matter to the full board with recommendation.
All right, thank you. Motion made, and without objection, this motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Could you please call item number 2?
Item number 2 is an ordinance amending the health code to prohibit tobacco retailers from selling tobacco products to persons 18, 19, or 20 years old.
Excellent. All right, Supervisor Wiener is the author of this ingenious idea.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your support. Colleagues, the legislation before us today will increase the legal age to purchase tobacco products in San Francisco from 18 years of age to 21 years of age. I want to thank Supervisor Cohen as well as Supervisor Marr and Supervisor Farrell for their co-sponsorship of the legislation. I also want to thank the Small Business Commission, the Board of Education, the Health Commission, and the Youth Commission, who have each body endorsed the legislation unanimously. And lastly, I want to thank the American Heart Association, the San Francisco Medical Society, and the San Francisco Tobacco-Free Coalition for their strong support and partnership in moving this proposal forward. Colleagues, by increasing the legal age to purchase all tobacco products from 18 to 21, this ordinance will treat traditional tobacco products and electronic tobacco products in the same manner. I want to thank Supervisor Marr for his leadership on that issue. Tobacco remains the leading cause of preventable deaths in the United States, killing nearly 500,000 people each and every year and costing the United States as much as $170 billion in healthcare expenditures. According to a study by UCSF, the annual costs of smoking in San Francisco alone amount to nearly $400 million in direct and indirect healthcare costs. When it comes to youth and adolescents, up to 1/3 of high school students nationally consume tobacco products. And in San Francisco, 5.4% of high school students regularly smoke cigarettes and 13% regularly use e-cigarettes. This means that in San Francisco, nearly 1 in 5 high school students regularly consume tobacco products. Each day, 700 children under the age of 18 become regular daily smokers, and almost 1/3 of them will eventually die prematurely due to that tobacco use. With this trend, nearly 6 million children under the age of 18 who are alive today will eventually die from tobacco. 95% of smoking starts before the age of 21. People who start smoking as teens are more likely to become lifelong smokers than those who start smoking in their 20s or later. And high school students who smoke are 3 times more likely to consume alcohol, 8 times more likely to use marijuana, and 22 times more likely to use other drugs. High school students who smoke are more likely to drop out and more likely to experience teen pregnancy. The nicotine in tobacco permanently changes the brain chemistry of children and adolescents. According to a federal study by the Institute of Medicine, if we were to increase the age to purchase tobacco products from 18 to 21 across the country, we would see a 25% drop in youth smoking, a 12% drop in overall smoking, a 12% drop in premature births, and a 16% drop in sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. Nationally, 80 jurisdictions have increased the age to purchase tobacco from 18 to 21, including New York City and the state of Hawaii. So although it's great when San Francisco can be the very first jurisdiction to do something, we're not here. But we are part of a growing trend in this country that we hope will eventually be a national standard. Locally, Santa Clara County adopted this increase for its unincorporated areas. Just last month, Berkeley passed a similar measure. Healdsburg, as you may recall, passed an ordinance raising the tobacco purchase age to 21, but unfortunately was bullied by the tobacco industry into withdrawing it under the threat of an expensive lawsuit. A bill to raise the tobacco purchase age throughout the state of California stalled in the legislature last year due to intense lobbying bankrolled by the cigarette industry. From an enforcement perspective, this ordinance does not change the existing framework. Our local ordinance will make the sale of tobacco, not the possession of tobacco, illegal to minors under the age of 21. The enforcement mechanism will be exactly the same as the one in effect today for people under the age of 18. Colleagues, thank you for your consideration of this important public health measure. If there are no questions, I want to invite up the Department of Public Health, specifically Derek Smith and Janine Young. I do see that Supervisor Peskin's name is on the roster.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Peskin, a few remarks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair to Supervisor Wiener, you did touch on the preemption issue, and I was just wondering if we could hear from our Deputy City Attorney with regard to any preemption issues that might exist. There's clearly a letter in the file from an organization that seems to be threatening litigation, so I'd just love to hear that we are not preempted.
All right.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. There's state law prohibits sale of tobacco products to minors. Our law would not duplicate, contradict, or make enforcement of that state law difficult or impossible. It basically complements the state law in a way that sellers in the city can comply with both the state and the new local law. The state law also does not occupy the entire field of tobacco regulation, and California courts of appeal interpreting the state law here have so concluded. So we're not preempted in this area.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I
Yes, please.
thank you to the Deputy City Attorney for that explanation. We do believe that this law is very defensible. This is an industry, the tobacco industry, that because its products serve no purpose and kill people, it is an industry that for 50 years or more has had to fight very hard to try to kill any sensible public health regulation. It's done it through spending enormous amounts of money through misinformation campaigns, as we saw for many years when the industry denied that tobacco even had a link to cancer and other illnesses. And it's not surprising at all that the industry, understanding, as I know the industry does, that when you hook people when they're young, you're more likely to hook them on smoking for life. So it's not surprising to see the industry fight an effort to increase the tobacco purchase age from 18 to 21, because that demographic, 18, 19, and 20-year-old, is a prime target for this industry to try to hook young people so that they smoke until they grow old or die from the tobacco products. And so they did, like I said, bully Healdsburg out of enforcing its legislation. And I'm not critical at all of Healdsburg's decision. Healdsburg is a small city that does not have the best municipal law office in the country like we have, and the resources to be able to defend and to go toe-to-toe with the major industry. San Francisco has a long history of putting forward cutting-edge progressive legislation in the realm of public health and consumer safety and other areas, and then fighting industry efforts to undermine our efforts, and we've often won, and I believe we'll win again here.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiner. Let's go to the Planning Department. Excuse me, let's go to the Department of Public Health.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor, we appreciate the attention. I'm Derek Smith, San Francisco Department of Public Health. I won't be redundant, and I think Supervisor Weiner appreciate your leadership on this issue. You covered most of the key points very beautifully, more eloquently than I can. But I will talk ever so slightly about some research on this issue to ensure that you have a fully informed decision on the matter. First, as you mentioned, number one preventable cause of death and disability in the United States. A lot of times folks look at health disorders, and in truth, most people who die from smoking die from heart attacks and die from strokes. Additionally, cigarette use is linked to virtually all the major cancers. If you unfortunately have a loved one, a friend or family member who's succumbed to a cancer, it's very likely that that cancer is linked to smoking. In addition, we have concerns about electronic cigarettes, which are all included in this proposal, which present significant unknown health risks as well as considerable use by young people. We've seen their use double year over year in the last few years, so there's definitely cause for concern about young people becoming addicted to nicotine products through e-products. A major crux, I think, about this ordinance and why it is eloquent and really could get to the point of reducing youth addiction is that young people access cigarettes through their peers. So a study from about a decade ago indicated that in California, 82% of adolescents get their cigarettes from another person. That's to say that there's a small number, maybe 18%, who are accessing it directly from a store that's breaking the law and selling to a minor. But in most cases, they're purchasing or they're receiving this from a friend friend, a family member, someone else. And as the supervisor said, almost all smokers today, if you ask any smoker that you know, almost in every case they started in that teenage sweet spot, that teenage period, which would go up to 20, 21 years. Additionally, adolescents who were 16 and 17 years old were particularly likely to get their cigarettes from someone who's ever so slightly older. So in that 18 to 20 year bracket, which would no longer be allowed for those people to access, and therefore the younger people, 16 and 17, wouldn't have that social source any longer. The health impact, as the supervisor indicated, the Institute of Medicine released a very strong statement this last year, research that stated that increasing the minimum age of purchase would considerably change how we see tobacco impacting public health in our community all across the country. Their projections show over time a 12% decrease in the overall smoking rate. And I'll talk a little bit about what happened in one particular small community in Massachusetts. But in general, a tremendous number. We're talking about if nationally this became a trend, and we are seeing it trending very quickly in a lot of communities across the country, we would see hundreds of thousands fewer premature deaths, completely avoidable deaths, because those young people never started smoking and never became sick later in life. Additionally, we'd probably see some near immediate reductions in preterm birth, low birth weight babies, sudden infant death syndrome, and some other issues that we continue to monitor as a Department of Public Health in San Francisco. Just to give a visual, a map that is already outdated because this is moving at such a quick level all across the nation, but we know of over 188 municipalities that have adopted something just like this in their own community, including the entire state of Hawaii, which has, I believe, slightly over 1 million population, so somewhat larger than our jurisdiction. Additionally, the city of Needham, Massachusetts raised the minimum age to 21 more than 10 years ago, and it was a great natural experiment because the communities right around Needham did not change the age of purchase, continued it at 18 years, and what Needham found is in comparison with those other communities, the youth smoking rate dropped, it cut in half in just 5 years. So it's possible, there's no way to project for sure, but it's very possible that the youth smoking rate would drastically decline in San Francisco, and we would be monitoring that at the Department of Public Health. So my colleague Janine Young, who's an inspector with the Environmental Health Branch of the Health Department, will talk a little bit about the enforcement that takes place now and what would occur after passage of this ordinance.
Thank you. Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Janine Young, Senior Health Inspector for the Department of Public Health. So currently the Department of Public Health sends educational mailers and conducts compliance inspections. We also partner with the San Francisco Police Department Decoy Minor Program. And since 2008, the San Francisco Police Department Minor Decoy Program has conducted approximately 1,800 site visits. Tobacco products were sold to the decoy minor at approximately 200 sites. And the majority of the sites have served 5 to 70 suspension days, depending upon the circumstances, and including if it was a repeat violation. So what I would like to say about this current proposed legislation, during the first year, no one will be penalized for selling tobacco to an 18, 19, or 20-year-old. Retailers that sell to an 18, 19, or 20-year-old will receive a notification that the law, notifying them that the law has changed. Before the 1 year grace period ends, we will do our due diligence in informing small businesses of the new law through mailers, site visits, stickers, and other educational efforts. And after the grace period, our enforcement procedures for selling to 18, 19, and 20-year-old will be the same procedure as I explained earlier. Finally, as part of our enforcement procedures, I would like to share that for first-time offenders, we actually have an opportunity for those offenders to reduce their permit suspension period. So we are here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Supervisor Weiner, are there any remarks that you have?
I don't, and that was the only presentation, so it probably makes sense to go to public comment.
All right. Let's go ahead, folks, and open up to public comment at this time. Again, you'll have 2 minutes if you'd like to comment on this item. Please line up To my left, I've got a stack of comment cards. So when you hear your name, just please line up. I've got Gilbert Criswell, Bob Gordon, Karen Aurora, Yogi Hendlin, Query Pack, and Wilma Batiste. Gilbert?
Yes, Gilbert Criswell. Here we go again. Supervisors that are nanny supervisors. They're always telling young people what to do, always trying to impose their will on young adults that are consenting as adults. You expect 18, 19, and 20-year-olds to register to vote for you, but yet you don't respect their choices, what they make in life. This is another way of government interfering in people's private lives, just like you try to cram down the soda tax on the voters of San Francisco that came out and resoundingly said no to that. Now you're forcing this legislation down the throats of San Franciscans that are should be able to make their own decisions for their own lives and not nanny government always in it. And the city attorney should know better than this. And I hope the tobacco industry is listening to this hearing and sues the city attorney. And I hope they spend thousands of dollars and millions of dollars defeating this ordinance. You're out of control. And I'm boycotting the Castro, and I never go to the Bayview because you're going to get shot there or stabbed there or knocked over the head. So any supervisor that supports this legislation is stupid.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors, members of the public. My name is Bob Gordon. I'm co-chair of the San Francisco Tobacco-Free Coalition. Some of our coalition members will be speaking in support of this effort that will limit youth access to tobacco products, will decrease the youth smoking rate, and will prevent many lifetimes of addiction, disease, and death. Our San Francisco Tobacco-Free Coalition is made up of many members, voluntary health organizations such as Breathe California, American Heart Association, and American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, and other community-based organizations such as Youth Leadership Institute, Bay Area Community Resources, and Vietnamese Youth Development Center, to name just a few. Fewer people smoking will not only benefit the many individuals who are near and dear to us, but the benefits are many to the city as a whole. Less tobacco use means tremendous cost savings in medical expenditures for the city. Fewer people smoking means safer home and work environments. And of course, fewer physical ills that are associated with the over 20 tobacco-related heart, lung, and cancer ailments that we now know to be associated with tobacco use. And our overall environment, less toxic cigarette butt waste, and the associated litter. In San Francisco, we have worked to protect our young people from a deadly lifetime of addiction to tobacco, an addiction that typically begins during the teenage years. And boy, don't the tobacco companies know that. We hope that our entire community, with your support, will join us in preventing needless additional death and addiction in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Karen Aurora. I am a resident pediatrician at UCSF in my third year of training, and I resoundingly support this effort and speak on as part of the behalf of the San Francisco Medical Society. One thing that I wanted to stress in particular that has been mentioned some is the reduction in rates of preterm birth, low birth weight babies, and SIDS. This is a population that's near and dear to my heart as a pediatrician, and there is a negative yet synergistic combination between teen pregnancy, teen smoking, and low birth weight and preterm birth. And so by increasing the tobacco sale age to 21. This is not only is this helpful to the youth and public at large, this is a measure that will help and support the health of babies and children who don't have a voice for themselves yet. The last thing I wanted to mention was, although this may be a bill that has that limits the autonomy of young people, as has been mentioned, I want to state that there is no benefit to people at all, to the human race, of tobacco. And so when there is no benefit of a substance or of anything, it is common that the legislature has effect on this in regard. And something I'll bring up would be first seatbelt legislation and speeding laws. These are infringements on our rights, but they help our safety, and therefore I fully support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, good afternoon. Board of Supervisors, general public. My name is Yogi Hendlin, and I am a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Tobacco Control Research and Education at UCSF. I'd just like to speak briefly about the 2014 Bay Area Young Adult Household Survey, which our center helped conduct, which found that in the Bay Area, these are statistics in the Bay Area, that 80% of Bay Area young adults started smoking before age 21, whereas at the same time, only 40% started before the age of 18. That means that between ages 18 and 21, that 40% of our local smokers started in that crucial age range. Now, at the same time, our study found that for 18 to 20-year-olds, that the vast majority of these youth and young adults got their cigarettes from friends rather than from convenience stores, so that the impact on local retailers, would only be between or roughly 2% of all tobacco sales. So this is a win-win with minimal costs to the public and extreme benefits for the future of San Francisco. But the real winners are the 15 to 17-year-old age group, which will not be able to pass as 18-year-olds and will likely see a 25% decrease in initiation. While the FDA did commission the Institute of Medicine's 2015 report to look at both age 21 and age 25 as potential cutoff dates, they found that age 21 is the sweet spot for public health. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker will be Query Pack, followed by Wilma Baptiste. I'm going to call a few more names. Kathy Otto, Angel Rodriguez, Randy Uong, Christopher Ndubuzi, Ted Guggenheim.
Good afternoon, supervisors and members of the public. My name is Corey Pak. I am a program administrator from the San Francisco Unified School District. I support the high school wellness programs as well as health education, including the tobacco use prevention education program that works with our middle school and high school students. We provide classroom education through our health education classes offered at high school and middle school level against tobacco use, as well as peer education through our youth outreach workers in the middle school and high school level. And we support this legislation because it will reduce the access and use of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes and vaping, quote-unquote, products in our schools and in our communities. We see it very much as an equity issue in addition to the statistics that Supervisor Wiener cited. I'd like to note that 32.2% of our African American middle school students have ever tried an e-cigarette product. 20% of our Hispanic Latino middle schoolers and 42.4% of all of our high school student seniors, as well as 41.5% of our lesbian, gay, and bisexual high school students. So we have disproportionate rates of use in our more at-risk communities, and that includes environmental and other risks as well. So this legislation would help reduce the access to our students and increase the health indicators for those students.
Thank you. Ms. Wilma Baptiste.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, supervisors, and public. I am Wilma Baptiste, who is a volunteer of the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. I am also a resident here in San Francisco, and I'm concerned about our young adults becoming cancer candidates. Tobacco remains the leading cause of preventable deaths in U.S. and increases your risk to many types of cancer. Tobacco companies, the leading target young people before they can fully appreciate the consequences of becoming addicted to these deadly products. 95% of smokers begin smoking before the age of 21. This ordinance will help prevent the youth of San Francisco from succumbing to an addiction that could cost them their lives, and because the poor and underserved smoke at higher rates, it has the greatest potential to impact the young lives of these populations. We thank San Francisco for being a leader in public health, and we urge the committee to support passage of this ordinance for the protection of many youth and young adults in this city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Kathy Otto.
Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Otto. I'm a volunteer legislative ambassador for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, and also a Fresh Start smoking cessation facilitator. I am a resident of San Francisco's Richmond District. Thanks for listening us with a public comment. Each year, more than 82,000 California children try cigarettes. Out of this number, 21,000 kids become smokers each year. Teens and young adults cannot appreciate the danger of smoking. Young adults and teens often try social smoking, not thinking they will become addicted. I know I did. Once someone is addicted to nicotine, it is extremely difficult to quit due to the addiction as well as the habit, which is the hardest part to quit. The health consequences begin immediately and accrue over a lifetime. It is years before the impact is felt. I know from teaching the Fresh Start smoking cessation program, most of the adults age 40 and 50 that I have in my class started smoking when they were like 15 or 16, and they never even once tried to quit. They end up in my class because they have heart problems, bronchitis, or worst case, even lung cancer. A little late to, better late than never, but we don't sell alcohol to kids under 21. It's time to apply the same wisdom to tobacco. If you make something inconvenient, people won't do it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Angel Rodriguez.
My name is Angel Rodriguez, and I'm a student at SF State. I am part of CHALK, Youth Policy Leaders for BACR. I support the idea of SF San Francisco increasing the minimum age to purchase tobacco to 21 years old, because the youth, especially my siblings, being peer pressured to smoke cigarettes and now e-cigarettes. An addiction to tobacco is something that I don't want to see in myself, nor my siblings, nor my peers. And so that is something that I support. Less youth smoking means, and what now popular is vaping, means protecting others from unwanted secondhand smoke, which is something that can cause lung cancer, heart disease, and asthma. And research shows that secondhand vape has also found heavy metals are detrimental to health. Thank you.
Thank you. Randy. Followed by Christopher, followed by Ted, and then we will hear from John Ma, Chris Sakalakis, Amber Finley, and Don Nunley.
Good afternoon. I'm Randy Wong, and I'm Breathe California's local director of tobacco prevention. The concept of prevention is key in tobacco policymaking, and for that reason, I'm glad that you're considering supporting a measure like this. By reducing and preventing tobacco use and the consequent healthcare costs, we'll also be able to help save money in the city budget for healthcare treatment. And so for that reason, I'm glad you're considering these steps. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. My name is Christopher Ndubizu, and I'm the e-cigarette control advocacy coordinator at Breathe California Golden Gate Public Health Partnership. I wholeheartedly support the idea of San Francisco increasing the age to purchase tobacco to 21 because nicotine use impedes youth cognitive development and can cause immediate health effects. Our research at Breathe has shown that tobacco companies target youth through flavored tobacco products like hookah, cigars, and e-cigarettes, which are easily accessible in fruit and candy-like flavors. For example, we surveyed 150 San Francisco teens and found that 80% of youth have used e-cigarettes, hookah, and cigars, and of those youth, 85% prefer those products flavored. If San Francisco raises the minimum purchasing age to 21, not only will youth have less access to flavored tobacco products, but it will prevent a series of health problems like lifelong nicotine addiction. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ted Guggenheim.
Hello, my name is Ted Guggenheim, and I live in the Upper Haight in District 5. I'm a member of the LGBT community that works to educate and advocate for protecting LGBT people from tobacco. I also work in LGBT cessation services, so have directly seen the struggle that LGBT people experience while trying to quit smoking. Tobacco use within the LGBT community is much higher than that in the general community. 50% greater for LGBT men and 3 times greater for LGBT women. Many of the men and women we serve started smoking in their youth because of the stigma and discrimination they face and aggressive marketing by the tobacco companies toward LGBT communities. LGBT youth are particularly vulnerable due to lack of support in addition to homophobia. The tobacco industry knows this and targets LGBT young people as future smokers. Raising the minimum age to 21 would limit access to LGBT youth and prevent them from ever picking up their first cigarette or e-cigarette. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. My name is John Ma. I'm a general surgeon in San Francisco. I am the secretary of the San Francisco Medical Society. I also chair on behalf of the American Heart Association the advocacy task force for the 10 western states of the United States of America. We're really proud of the success in passing the legislation in Hawaii, and I really wanted to applaud the author of this bill for the intelligence and courage to move this discussion forward. Since the publication of the Surgeon General's report on smoking, in the intervening 50 years, there have been over 20 million Americans who've died from tobacco-related illness, and countless number of lives have been impacted as a result of those deaths. If you added all of the deaths in America's wars, you would have to multiply that by 10 to account for the number of deaths that have resulted from tobacco. I have a letter here from Dr. Richard Padala, and he's the president of the San Francisco Medical Society. It's our letter in support of this very important legislation. Just wanted to finish by highlighting 2 somewhat interesting contradictions. As a result of intense lobbying by the tobacco industry, electronic cigarettes have not been defined as a tobacco product at the state legislative level, and so therefore I do not believe that preemption would hold in that particular area. Secondly, there's been an effort by the industry and the electronic cigarette manufacturers to argue that electronic cigarettes are safer than combustible traditional cigarettes. If that is truly their belief, then I would call upon them to stop the sales of traditional cigarettes as there is a safe, if they really believe it's a safer alternative. Thank you so much for your leadership, and thank you for your aye vote on this legislation.
Thank you, Dr. Ma. Next speaker will be Chris Sakalakis, followed by Amber Finley, followed by Don Nunley, followed by Alex. I can't read your writing, Alex. I'm sorry, I don't know your last name. and James Lau. Hey, Chris.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen, and thank you, supervisors, for the opportunity to speak. My name is Chris Sakalakis. I am the chairman of the board for the Greater Bay Area of the American Heart Association, and I am here to speak in support of this resolution. It's pretty simple. As a father of two, one teenager and a tween, I don't want my kids to smoke because smoking makes everything worse. There isn't a single thing that smoking improves. It makes every single medical condition worse. The Heart Association looks at 7 health factors that have an influence on heart disease, things like cholesterol, high blood pressure, sodium, and, of course, smoking. So the less smoking there is, the less heart disease there is. It's really that simple. As many people have said before me, 90% of people who smoke start when they're teenagers, as adolescents. And the adolescent mind is one that's still developing. Nicotine changes the brain in a serious way, and it creates a lifelong addiction. If by raising the minimum age from 18 to 21, we can start to stem the tide of that addiction and reduce the amount of both deaths and the number of smokers in the future. That will save money for the city of San Francisco, which spends over $380 million every year on the direct and indirect health care costs of smoking. Thank you very much for putting this forward, and I appreciate your leadership here.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Next speaker is Amber Finley.
Hi, my name is Amber Finley, and I
In the microphone, Amber. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amber Finley, and I am a youth advocate for the BYDC. And I believe that we should raise the age to 21 because it is an easier access for youth to start smoking, and it is more of a likely chance that they have a worse health as they get older. For our organization, we went around the neighborhood in the Tenderloin, and we picked up a bunch of cigarette litter, and that's like most of the cigarette litter was, and it was really harmful for the environment and for us to breathe because all the toxins just lay there on the sidewalk, and it's not good for our health. We found about 500 cigarette butts on just one block, and we found many more of that. Okay, and thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker. Don Nunley.
Hello. Hi, I'm Don, and I've lived in the Tenderloin for almost 30 years. I'm a food justice leader for the Tenderloin Healthy Corner Store Coalition. I've been trying to quit for a long time. I started smoking when I was in my late 20s. I told my kids when they were little not to smoke. They don't smoke. This law will help discourage kids like mine from starting to smoke. Also, as a food justice leader, I work with corner stores in the Tenderloin to help with their business and check their produce. What I've learned from the store owner is that cigarettes don't sell well, and his store mostly attracts families. It is great that with help from our program, the store makes most of their money from produce, dairy, bread, and other groceries. I like the idea of San Francisco raising the minimum age of buying tobacco to 21 because it can be an opportunity to increase healthy products at stores in the community and also protect kids from using tobacco. Thank you.
You're welcome. Next speaker will be Alex, followed by James Lau, followed by Brittany, followed by Andrea Garcia, Carol Magruder, and then that's it.
Right. Oh, good evening, Board of Supervisors. Hello, my name is Alex Abelos. Thank you. I am here representing the Vietnamese Youth Development Center and the Tenderloin District, also in particular the API/Southeast Asian areas. Mainly when it comes to tobacco and tobacco use, it isn't even 18. A lot of our community starts at 13, starts at 12. And it's not even a choice at some points in times because it's SRO with multiple families smoking their cigarettes within the house. With that said, when it comes to that accessibility, when it comes to all of that health stuff, there's a very, very big cultural component to this that needs to be addressed. And with the cigarette legislation coming from 18 to 21, that could be one of the first steps into helping to bridge that gap into understanding like how the effects of cigarettes and how cigarettes infiltrate my community. Also, it keeps the checks and balance. In the TL, we have about 3 to 4 liquor stores, cigarette stores on every block. On top of that, like my young youth advocate said, we have the garbage that gets thrown on the floor that never gets picked up. With that said, I think, and I personally believe, that the legislation of Tobacco 21 will lead to a much more healthier look to the neighborhood, a much more vibrant kind of look to the neighborhood, and also an awareness that needs to be put forth because of all the indifference, all of the cynicism, and in general, all of like the we'll say the misconceptions of the neighborhood. So with Tobacco 21 passing, hopefully this will be the first steps into some real stuff happening in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. James Lau?
Hi, my name is James Lau, and I am a former smoker. I've smoked for over 20 years, and I've just recently quit smoking. I started smoking when I was around 16 years old, but the heaviest amount of smoking I've done was during the ages of 18, 19, and 20 when I was able to buy them. And I was smoking up to 2 packs a day at that time. It was a time where my self-identity was being formed, where I had to make myself up and create myself, my own image. And cigarettes was a big part of that. And it lasted for over 20 years. And I'm in support of this legislation to raise the minimum age. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker.
I don't know whether I'm the lone voice demurring to this item on the agenda. I am appearing anonymously for lack of process on this subject matter. I find the National, Association for the Smokers Sellers objecting on the basis of lack of due process, and I agree with that. I found that there was not adequate notice. The letters that were before the board were not in the library, or they were not posted. The people in general do not know that. They're not here. They have not given alternative remedies for something that is injurious, like saying, let's go to war because then we'll just wipe out the problem, instead of finding out what's the matter, what are people's grievances. How can the city do something about its own operations to solve the problem much better and more satisfactorily? How does it right now think of something bad to eliminate and really make for more corruption in the city when it is disobeying preemption by the state? Some of you will be wanting to be legislators, but you may get the same kind of treatment with what you try to legislate at state level, that the city does not recognize the state law when it wants to do something. And I hope it can be done better and processed right. I've been working for years to abate the epidemic in the shelters and other places in San Francisco from the smoking. But I cannot say I think that this vote by this body has any legitimacy. And I'd like to see it what is necessary, legitimate, and not make for more problems of corruption in the city.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Brittany Chikwata, and I'm the Advocacy Director for the American Heart Association. Thank you guys for hearing this today. I just wanted to come out and share my full support for this ordinance. Smoking is the only habit that you can pick up, and if you use cigarettes correctly, you will die. It will kill you. It's a fatal habit. This is very common sense, smart policy. We know that while rates of smoking have gone down over the last 50 years in California, amongst communities of color, teens of color, and LGBT communities, the rates are more than double for the state of California of smoking. So I appreciate Supervisor Wiener and the co-sponsors for bringing this legislation forward, and I am excited to get your aye vote in support and move it forward where the state has been hesitant. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea Garcia.
Hi, I'm Andrea Garcia, and I'm 20 years old. I'm also a student at San Francisco State University, and I'm part of the Youth Leadership Institute in San Francisco. I support the idea of San Francisco increasing the minimum age to purchase tobacco to 21 because I see too many of my friends, and even those under age of the 18, being peer pressured to smoke or become addicted to cigarettes and e-cigarettes. Tobacco companies aggressively market their products to young people, especially young people of color like my friends and family, through advertisements and marketing. Raising the minimum age would stop tobacco companies from recruiting and hooking more youth on addictive and harmful nicotine. We would protect generations of San Franciscans from lung cancer and lung and heart disease and poor health. So thank you for putting this legislation forward, and I also thank you for your time.
Thank you for your advocacy. Carol McGruder, and if there's anyone else that has not had an opportunity to speak on this item, please come up. The floor will be yours.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Carol McGruder, and I'm the co-chair of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. And I grew up in Bayview Hunters Point. I don't live there now, but I have lots of friends and families. I have a photo here that I'd like you to pull up. We hear a lot of talk about what's killing our black men and our black boys. We have seen police brutality videos from across the country. I travel all over this country, and wherever I go, when I turn on the radio, I hear what black boy was killed. But the number one killer of black men is tobacco, is cigarettes. And this is where it starts. And these boys, nobody's trying to protect them from the public health policies that are enacted in this country. When Obama signed the Tobacco Control Act, the products that they smoke, which are Black and Mild, Swisher Sweets, and menthol cigarettes, were excluded from the Tobacco Control Act. So it's up to local municipalities to enact this most stringent public policy that is not punitive. We do not want any kind of possession charge against people. This should be solely for the retailers who are selling the product, so that we don't have any extra interaction between law enforcement and black and brown young men. And so this is about denormalizing this behavior. It's not normal, but our children are inundated with it, and they believe that it's normal, but it is not. And I want to contrast that photo. That's a picture from a Morehouse graduation in Atlanta. And so that's what it can be if adults are adults and protect their children. And I'm also the mother of young adults. As if you have children, there's nothing magical that happens at 18 where your children get some sense. They're still in your pocket, they're still in your home, and you are still very much contributing to racism, and especially in San Francisco where people cannot afford to move. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Berkeley has done it, and we're going to be going to Detroit and Chicago next week. They're looking at it. So we're looking for San Francisco also to get in there and show the rest of the country how to do it. Thank you.
Thank you for that sobering reminder. Next speaker, please.
My name is Maina Young. I'm a mother of 2 young adults, and I do support this legislation. It's same as alcohol. You know, it has a long-term effect on children's health and life. So I support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak on this item? Item number 2. Okay, seeing no more folks, public comment will be closed at this time. Thank you. Supervisor Wiener, do you have any final remarks?
Yes, thank you. And Madam Chair, I think sometimes we hear a lot of public comment at the Board of Supervisors, and there are times when you've been working on an issue and the public comment comes, and they're all comments that you've heard before, and it's nothing new. But I have to say today, this was very moving public comment. Obviously, I'm a strong supporter of this, so I didn't have to be persuaded. But the public comment was incredibly persuasive, and I just want to thank everyone for coming out. It's just a few of the points that were raised that we didn't discuss at the beginning. One, which I think is very important, is this isn't just about 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. It's about high school students that can pass as 18-year-olds, and this makes it harder for them to do this. So it doesn't just help 18, 19, 20-year-olds. Is also going to be helpful in terms of efforts to make it harder for high school students to get access to tobacco. And I also think the last speaker, in terms of the social justice aspect of this issue, and I think sometimes in these debates about public health, it's easy to lose sight of, in addition to the broader public health issues, that the negative impacts of tobacco, as with sugary beverages, disproportionately impact low-income communities, communities of color, and so sometimes I'm glad that we did not hear what I think is a false regressive argument today, because what's regressive are these disproportionate health impacts. I also just want to make a couple other comments. We heard a comment earlier at the beginning suggesting that somehow the voters of San Francisco were not with us. Well, I think it's important to look at the numbers. When the cigarette tax was on the ballot, the statewide cigarette tax a few years ago, the tobacco industry spent tens of millions of dollars to attack it statewide. And that cigarette tax, unfortunately, failed. It was very, very close, but it failed. It received, if my memory is correct, 73% of the vote in San Francisco, about 25 points higher than it received statewide. And the soda tax, despite $10 million in soda industry corporate spending against it, received 56% of the vote. And while we did not receive the 2/3 that we needed to pass it, 56% is actually a pretty strong majority. So we know that the people of San Francisco, as they have for many years, support strong progressive public health measures. And then finally, I do want to just acknowledge that we, as I mentioned at the beginning, in the state legislature, the effort to have a statewide minimum tobacco purchase age of 21 did fail. I hope that it eventually passes, and I would love to see all of our local laws subsumed by a statewide age of 21. And I want to thank our state senator, Mark Leno, for being a really strong advocate in Sacramento, particularly around e-cigarettes. He had a very difficult situation where the tobacco industry was able to gut one of his bills, but I know he'll keep fighting, as will our entire city. So, Madam Chair, if there are no additional questions or comments, I moved that we forward this item 2, to the full Board of Supervisors with a positive recommendation.
All right, a motion's been made, and looks like the vote will be unanimous. So we'll move this motion with a positive recommendation forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. All right, now let's call item number 3.
Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code zoning map to rezone Noe Valley Town Square to a public and open space designation.
Okay, Supervisor Wiener is also the author of this item and will lead the discussion.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, this is a cleanup piece of legislation. You may recall that a few years ago, this board passed legislation purchasing a parking lot on 24th Street that is the site of the Noe Valley Farmers Market, and that was slated for development. The acquisition of this site by the city allows us to preserve this open space, and the next step is what we're doing right now, which is to physically transform this space into a permanent park and town square. And it's very exciting for the neighborhood. Not only will the farmers market, which is now happening on 24th Street with the street closure, and be able to move back into that space. And if you haven't been to the Noe Valley Farmers Market, I suggest you go. It's a really amazing institution. But this will be 365 days a year, a wonderful community resource. There is no open space in the heart of Noe Valley. and this will be a wonderful project. And I want to thank all the members of the community and Rec and Park and everyone who has made this happen. We do need to rezone this land as P for public, and so that is the legislation that is before us today, to P and also OS, open space, so that we can permanently protect it.
All right, thank you so much. Is there a staff presentation on this item, Mr. Weiner?
I think staff is available for questions. All
right, thank you. I think this is pretty straightforward. We could take this. Let's go ahead and take public comment on item number 3. If there's any member of the public that'd like to speak on this item, please come up to the podium. Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. Well, Supervisor Weiner, looks like it's pretty straightforward. I've got a motion by Supervisor Peskin for a positive recommendation to move this forward. Let's move this forward with a positive recommendation unanimously. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Could you please call item number 4?
Item number 4 is an ordinance amending the planning and building codes to require conditional use authorization for the removal of any residential unit with certain exemptions and require that notices of violation mandate legalization of an illegal unit.
Okay, Supervisor Avalos has not joined us just yet, but he is speaking and leading the discussion for item 4. Let's see, why don't we wait and give him a couple minutes to arrive. Thank you. Welcome. Okay, seeing how Supervisor Avalos is here, we'll give him a moment to sit down and collect himself. And Supervisor Avalos, when you're ready, we are ready to hear item 4.
Great, thank you, Chair Cohen, and thank you for scheduling this and being patient with this fairly complicated piece of legislation that's been making its way through the Board of Supervisors. This is overall about how to have a strong tool to preserve housing units in San Francisco. We've already passed one section of this ordinance that would affect units in the C3 zone. This legislation required additional review at the Building Inspection Commission relative to unauthorized units. And so I have an amendment of the whole that I will share with you all. The main amendments were reviewed before the Building Inspection Commission last week, and they're here before us. I'll explain. There are essentially 6 main amendments that are here. One is to provide for initial DBI screening before requiring conditional use permits. So generally, an unauthorized unit will be issued a notice of violation either to legalize the unit or apply for conditional use for removal of the unit. And so we wanted to make sure that the processes in this legislation were aligned with the Department of Building Inspection. So this Amendment 1 would specify that when a notice of violation is issued for an unauthorized unit, it would direct the property owner to submit information so that DBI can determine if the unauthorized unit can be legalized. If DBI determines that there is no legal path for legalization, a conditional use permit would not be required to remove the unit. So we'll take away that difficult threshold for units that have no pathway for legalization. The second amendment is regarding unauthorized units that receive a notice of violation that have imminent safety hazards. And this amendment clarifies that the new NOV requirement for unauthorized units does not apply if the building official determines that an imminent life safety hazard exists. The next amendment is to delete the reissuance of unabated notice of violations. So we would delete the proposed building section code 102A.3.1.1 that would require DBI to reissue unabated notices of violations for unauthorized units. And basically, we're trying to streamline the process. The fourth amendment would suspend any notice of violation during legalization process. So we're specifying that the notice of violation shall be temporarily suspended once the property owner submits an application for either legalization or removal of the unauthorized unit unless the department identifies that an imminent life safety hazard exists. Essentially, we don't want to create dual process. We'll have the process that is about legalization or conditional conditional use be the one that's most important to pursue. 5, to rescind notice of violations upon completion of process. So specify that the notice of violation and any liens shall be rescinded if either legalization or removal of the unauthorized unit is approved within 1 year. So again, we don't want to have dual process. We don't want to have a lien or an NOV hanging over a property owner's head when that property owner has actually sought legalization or removal through CU. And the last is 6 is planning consideration for financial hardship. So we are looking at additional criteria for the Planning Commission to consider when they review applications to demolish unauthorized units. If there's no city funds that are available to assist the property owner with the cost of legalization, the Commission would consider if the cost constitutes a financial hardship. We also have 2 potential follow pieces of legislation, one being pursued by Supervisor Wiener, which would be a code enforcement fund. There's a fund in DBI's budget of $3.7 million that's reserved that could be used for efforts around legalization and bringing buildings units up to code. There's also legislation that I am pursuing that would tap funds from Prop C's Housing Stabilization Fund program that could be used for legalization as well. So these are those 6 amendments, and then we have follow-up legislation around funds that could assist property owners in seeking to legalize their units that are moving forward. But colleagues, I would be interested in your supporting this amendment of the whole today. I do believe that Supervisor Wiener has additional amendments that he's considering. The process for that could involve duplicating the file or moving to the full board and then setting a part back. And that is really relative to single-family homes that have in-law units. And you can follow up with me. On me, Supervisor Wiener.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Wiener, do you have any remarks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first, I want to thank Supervisor Avalos for working with DBI and others to come up with additional amendments. I think we all, and we were all supportive a few years ago of moving towards a legalization program for the tens of thousands of illegal in-law units in San Francisco. And really preserving that housing stock, which is some of our most affordable housing stock for so many tenants in San Francisco. As we discussed in one of the previous hearings on this legislation, I know there were some concerns that I and others expressed about what would happen if someone has an illegal unit and there's say a complaint and a notice of violation, and then they are forced by the city or compelled to legalize a unit regardless of their financial ability to do it, regardless of how expensive it might be to achieve that legalization, because every unit, of course, is unique and some can be quite expensive to legalize. I also had expressed a concern about tapping significantly into the code enforcement fund that we are currently creating. As a reminder, in last year's budget, I was able to obtain through our budget a reserve of about $4 million over 2 years to help in code enforcement efforts in connection with the legislation that we're moving forward with now to improve code enforcement efforts, but also to provide low-interest, affordable loans for particularly smaller property owners who have code violations that are often safety problems for an apartment building, but who don't have the resources to make the code corrections. And so in addition to doing enforcement as a city, we want to help these owners come into compliance, which helps them and which helps the tenants in their buildings stay safe. And I had a concern that if we started to significantly tap into this fund for the in-law legalization mandate, that could consume the entire fund and undermine some of the other needs that we know are out there. So I want to thank Supervisor Avalos for these amendments. I do have an amendment that I want to offer today, and then I will request that we duplicate the file and then hold one version in committee so that we can address the issue around single-family homes, which I think do warrant their at least consideration of whether they should have a modified standard compared to multi-unit buildings. But the amendment I want to offer today is to provide people with a period of time, 3 years, up to 3 years, to come into compliance once the city has determined that there is a violation. So if someone is being required by the city to legalize their in-law unit, because it can be a real financial hardship, to give people 3 years to be able to plan and move in that direction, rather than having them immediately go into some sort of enforcement proceeding if they're unable to make a go of it right away. So that is my amendment to provide people with a 3-year compliance deadline.
All right, thank you. I also, too, want to go on record. I'm supportive of the legislation and the intent in helping to preserve as much of our city's housing stock. And after further and closer review, I'd like to see it's become evident is that the impact that this legislation will have on single-family homes, it'd be far greater and a heavier burden on those particular property owners. So I'd like to take a little bit more time to create a simpler and more streamlined process for single-family homes. So I certainly will support the motion to duplicate the file and continue one file, so we can continue one file to move forward in the process, as well as take time to work out the issues around single-family homes. And look forward to doing the work that will come in doing that. Supervisor Avalos, is there any remarks you have? If not, we can go to public comment. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for public comment. I've got a card from Alex Koo, Mina Young, Kwang Chang, Christy Tam, Noni Rechin, Ryan Patterson, and Tom Majulovich. Alex Koo, you're first.
My name is Alex Koo. I think around the money for $4 million try to help the owners legalizing the in-law unit. That is a very, very small amount in compare of tens of thousands of legal units. Why the owners, they don't want to legalize the in-law unit? Because rent control. If a single family try to legalize the downstairs in-law unit, and then will become 2 units, will become permanently under rent control. That's why the owners, they refuse to apply to legalize the downstairs in-law unit, because rent control problem. Now the single family has no rent control. If they legalize the downstairs units, it's a legalization for that, and then upstairs and downstairs will become 2 units, will become permanently rent control. That's why no people want to legalize it. I think the problem is the rent control. And then the City Hall cannot force the owners to do this and that. That's why San Francisco creates so many problems. I think that the supervisors should consider about that. Rent control kills the rent. Now you cannot rent anything. San Francisco, 1 bedroom, less than $3,000. And then there's still for 35,000 empty rent control units. The owners, they don't want to rent away. 35,000 units, rent control units, still keep vacant because rent control.
Thank you. Is there next speaker, please?
My name is Mina Young. I'm a small property owner, and I oppose this legislation. It's just more restriction and discouragement for people not to rent out their place, because rent becomes loose of control. So, and also illegal units could come in all kinds of shapes and forms. Not everything can be conducive to legalizing, even though, so it's not right to not give the owners the options to opt out and have them remove the unit when it's not really conducive to legalization. So please do not pass this. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Quan Chun. No on this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
My name is Christy. I am a small property owner in San Francisco. I urge the city to oppose the mandatory legalize of the legal units. I think the owners, this is the private property. I think the owner should have the right to choose to whether to legalize it or not, based on the individual situations like financial difficulties, financial hardships. Number two, as we all know, the housing shortage is in shortage right now, and I think the city's priority should focus on how to encourage owners to rent out their affordable in-laws, not to put more restrictions to forcing the owners to out of the rental market. And if this legislation passed, I think more the rentals in San Francisco is going to go high, even higher than now. So it make it very difficult for immigrants, low incomes to afford to live in San Francisco. Please do not pass this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Tom Radulovich with Livable City. We're here to speak in favor of this legislation. We have been champions of legalizing in-law units, both new units and existing buildings. Thank you, Supervisor Wiener, for doing that in your district. But also legalizing the tens of thousands of units in this city that have been built, in some places, in many cases, occupied for decades. In most cases, are rent controlled, but have been in a legal limbo. So this ordinance would not require you to push a unit through the legalization process. If you want to keep your units in limbo and keep renting them, this process isn't going to make you change its legal status. It only applies if you try to remove that unit. If you try to destroy or demolish a unit, that's when this would kick in. You would have to then demonstrate that you had a cause to remove that unit. So I think we have to acknowledge that a lot of these units have a lot of issues. They're going to be in limbo for a while, but we don't want to lose them. Just wanted to give a snapshot, too, from your Housing Balance Report. It looked at the period 2005 to 2015. During that period, San Francisco built 6,559 affordable units. So these are permanently affordable units built in that 10-year period. However, during that same period, we lost 5,470 protected units. So meaning about as many rent-controlled units were lost during that period as affordable housing units built. So we are in a city in a huge housing crisis, working against ourselves in very many ways with the laws that we have. This removal of illegal units is one of the chief ways that rent-controlled and affordable housing is getting lost. This would slow that down, require review before you can do that. It's good housing policy, and we encourage you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Noni Richin. I'm here representing the small property owners of San Francisco. Our attorney is here to offer a letter of objection to this, and although I feel that illegal units in an ideal world would never be offered, they are. And if a person who owns the house, owns the property, has given all his resources, decides to take that unit off the market, that should be his right also. This goes way beyond protection of any kind of rights. It also has been pushed through without all of the proper hearings at the proper committees and the proper legislative bodies, and we ask that it be slowed down, and that particularly that the part where if it does become legalized, it can never be removed, be stricken from the legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noni. Next speaker, please.
Hello, Madam Chair and Supervisors. Ryan Patterson on behalf of 1049 Market Street, LLC, 1067 Market Street, LLC, the Small Property Owners of San Francisco, and the Small Property Owners of San Francisco Institute. I want to agree, first of all, with Supervisor Avalos on one thing, which is that this is a fairly complicated piece of legislation. And for that reason, I think it's doubly important that it go through the proper protocols for consideration before it's passed on. This has not been reviewed by the Building Inspection Commission or the Planning Commission. They have not rendered a final recommendation on this legislation. And as this legislation is being substantially amended, substantially changed today, it would be appropriate to refer the amended version back to those bodies for their consideration. I don't believe the Planning Commission has even sent out an agenda with this ordinance on it for consideration yet. There are a number of other defects in this ordinance. CEQA, this has received a new categorical exemption as not a project, which is clearly erroneous. We're talking about forcing the legalization of tens of thousands of units across the city where previously they would be able to be removed without going through a conditional use process. The result of that will be a tremendous increase in density in some neighborhoods, as well as owners keeping those units off the market in the future, which means empty buildings, urban decay, and blight. The ordinance is also retroactive in some situations, applying to suspended permits even when they've been vested, which is legally inappropriate. The financial feasibility test is also unworkable, as legalizing illegal units often decreases the value of properties rather than increasing them. That test does not work. We would like to review the proposed amendments in writing before they're passed along and appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you very much. Just to set the record straight, these amendments were brought before the Building Inspection Commission the past week, and that was actually stated was going to happen the last time this legislation was before us in land use a couple weeks ago. So we've also had a very, very thorough process for this complicated legislation through the Planning Commission, and they've been very, very helpful in making sure that we've crafted it, thinking about all the different ways that this could be put together as strong as it can be, and I think we have that before us. And Building Inspection Commission also gave us significant input to craft this legislation. So I feel that the process has been very, very sound, very, very thorough, and we've been careful with it, making sure that we followed every step of the process of land use and the commissions before going to the full board.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Please, the next one.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Gauthier. I just want to thank you for the due diligence that you've put into figuring out this legislation and making sure that it's the best possible before it gets passed. I think that this legislation is really helpful for a lot of people in the city. What I've heard in terms of there being concerns around landlord rights, I just want to speak to that a little bit. In terms of a landlord deciding to rent out a space without going through the city and therefore making money off of the space in a way that's not been authorized, I just think that it makes sense for there to be a process for the city to say whether or not they can remove that unit and for the people who reside in that unit to have a voice. So I really support this legislation for that reason. I think if you want to make money off of something without doing it legally, you take on liability and risk, and so you have to be held accountable or responsible for that. Somebody's going to lose, right? If the landlord has to legalize something, maybe they feel like they're losing some of their rights. But if a tenant gets evicted because they decide to remove it without going through the city, just like they decided to put it on the market for that rate without going through the city, the tenant loses. So, you know, we just have to look at what makes sense, and I think that this legislation really makes sense. So I want to thank you for that. I also just want to say, as an artist in the city, knowing that a lot of commercial spaces, when they weren't as financially viable during the downturn, got rented out to artists because we're the ones who will move into those spaces and make beautiful use out of them, that a lot of those people are at risk. And so I think it's really great that you're trying in some way to keep artists and art spaces in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Robin Drysdale, and I'm a dance artist here in San Francisco. I am going to be affected potentially by a change in the space that I'm in. And over the past 10 years that I've been speaking, I've found it very difficult to find spaces that are usable for artists like me. So I'm in support of this legislation. Spaces like this are important for bringing the community together and allowing for self-expression and creativity. Spaces like this will allow arts to stay alive, and I think that if you're going to penalize us for something that the owner came in and did, it's going to be difficult. So thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, I'm Peter Reitz with Small Property Owners. I'll be interested in seeing what the proposition is that Supervisor Wiener is putting forth. I'm very much concerned about the impact, the financial impact on single-family homes when they are converted to 2 units and fall under rent control. Most of our members in the small property owners who have just single-family homes are very much opposed to this, and for reason. They've worked very hard. Many of them are immigrant families. They've come here. 3 or 4 members of the family are paying off the mortgage, and then they find out that they're under their unit, their building is under rent control, and they're supposed to incur a loss when they sell it. That isn't really right. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other? Oh, next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Janann New, San Francisco Apartment Association. I would just like to thank you for spending time on this legislation. Thanks to Supervisor Avalos, Wiener, Cohen, and Peskin. It's very complicated, and we appreciate the time that you all put in and DBI put into trying to get this right. I just have a couple of comments. One is I would like to say the 3-year time frame suggested by Supervisor Wiener is a really good idea. We need to allow people a window for compliance. Second of all, please treat multi-unit buildings differently than you treat single-family homes. They're 2 different types of properties and need to be addressed separately. And also, I would like to recommend a mandatory DR process instead of the CU process. I think for property owners, a mandatory DR is a much much understandable, less expensive way to get to the same end result. A conditional use requires the hiring of attorneys, a long waiting process if they need to come here to see all of you. On a small building, that's a high burden. Where DR, we're typically trained to go to the Board of Appeals rather than appealing to the Board of Supervisors. So I would make that suggestion, and that's it, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is John Rodriguez. I'm a member of the Code Advisory Committee. I just wanted to thank the supervisors, in particular Supervisor Avalos and your team, and working with the Department of Building Inspection and our committee in trying to make this legislation the best it can. I think we all agree with the objectives and trying to work through what will work in the language. So I just wanted to say thank you. I'm a newest member of the Code Advisory Committee, so I needed to take this opportunity to speak. But we're looking forward to seeing the final legislation and with the amendments and to work through it. So thank you again.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other members of the public that'd like to speak on item 4? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed at this time. Are there any?
Great.
Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank everyone who spent a significant amount of hours on this legislation, the Planning Department, Planning Commission, and Department of Building Inspection Commission, as well as the Code Advisory Committee of the Building Inspection. Thank you for being here as well. This has been legislation has been a long time in the making, and for many people in San Francisco who have lost their units or who are threatened with losing their living space, it's important that we move forward as quickly as possible. So I do appreciate the time, but we have to move forward. So I'd like to urge colleagues here to accept the amendment of the whole and forward to the full board for with approval.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions and comments. The first is, I mentioned at the beginning an amendment to give people 3 years. Apparently, the city attorney, Mr. Gibner, informed me that the Building Inspection Commission had discussed a 1-year window or time period for people to come into compliance after receiving a notice of violation. And under the charter, apparently we cannot go beyond that unless the Building Inspection Commission is given an opportunity to discuss the 3 years as well. And so the amendment I'll make today before we divide the file will be for 1 year because we cannot go beyond that. I'm sorry, Mr. Givner?
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. So that the 1 year provision is in the amendment of the whole that Supervisor.
Oh, it already is in there. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So what I will be doing then is once we duplicate the file for the file that remains in committee, I'll be making an amendment for 3 years, and then we can, I hope, pass that once the Building Inspection Commission can have an opportunity to discuss it. I do have a couple of questions. One is Mr. Radulovich made a comment today. That I think, if my recollection serves, is inconsistent with what the planning department told us a few weeks ago about whether people would in fact be required to come into or to legalize a unit once they receive a notice of violation. And I believe the planning department has said a few weeks ago that indeed they would. And I just want to get clarification on that, since what Mr. Radulovich said was different than that.
You're correct, Supervisor. If someone gets a notice of violation, they do have to come into the planning department, get the CU to legalize the unit. But if they don't get a notice of violation and everything remains the same, they're not compelled to come in and legalize the unit.
Right. So if no one ever says anything, if they just go under the radar the way many have for many years, nothing changes. But if they get a notice of violation because, for example, a neighbor files a complaint against them, then they have a choice to either, they must either legalize or get a conditional use to remove the unit.
That's correct.
Okay. So they don't have a choice to just stay in the status quo once they get the notice of violation.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. That's important clarification. And then the second question is, Ms. New had raised this issue of a mandatory DR versus a conditional use. And I know there are various situations where we debate between DR and conditional use. Either way, it goes to the Planning Commission for a decision. DR is appealable to the Board of Permit Appeals. A conditional use is appealable to this board. Colleagues, I would just ask what your view is on that particular issue, if anyone has any comments on it. We will then, I'll ask to duplicate the file and then make some amendments to the duplicated file that will remain in committee. Thank you, Madam Chair.
No problems, Supervisor Peskin.
And relative to Supervisor Wiener's question about ultimately replacing conditional use with mandatory DR, speaking on behalf of myself, I'm fine with that.
All right, I am as well. Mr. Wiener, do you want to make your...
So in that case, first I request that we duplicate the file. I think that does not require a vote. And then for one version...
Did we accept the amendment of the whole already, or...?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So I move the amendments as described by Supervisor Avalos at the beginning of the hearing.
All right, without objection, that motion passes unanimously.
And now I request that we duplicate the amended file. And as to the version that I'll intend to ask the committee to keep in committee, I'd like to make two amendments. The first would be to increase the number of years to come into compliance from 1 year to 3 years. And the second is to replace the requirement of a conditional use with a mandatory discretionary review to the Planning Commission.
All right.
Mr. Givner?
Before you vote on the second proposal, I would recommend, just so that we can have somebody in my office look at the DR proposal, that will result in a number of changes throughout this entire 77-page ordinance. That I'm not sure exactly how it cascades through the ordinance, but there are many references to conditional use and the factors that the Planning Commission will consider in conditional use authorization considerations. So what I'd recommend on the second proposal is that you postpone that actual amendment for a week so that we can put something in front of you in writing.
That would be fine with me. Clearly, there's unanimous support on the board to make the change, and I don't. I had intended to move to continue the call of the chair, but maybe since there will be another Building Inspection Commission hearing, maybe we should continue it then to a time certain, or we could continue it to next week and make the amendment then.
Well, the Building Inspection Commission requested that it be heard again at their body.
Yeah.
So why don't we just schedule it after their meeting?
And do we know when that hearing is going to happen? Mr. Strawn is here from.
Yes, Supervisors, that will be the third week of March. I think around March 16th is the next Building Commission.
March 16th. Okay, so when is the next land use hearing after that?
That would be March 21st.
Okay. And Mr. Strawn, can I also ask, this issue of the mandatory DR, was that already discussed by the Building Inspection Commission?
I don't believe it was.
Okay.
I don't remember any discussion about that from the meeting last week.
Okay. Then I would like to just request that the BIC consider that as well.
Would that be a planning?
Deputy
City Attorney
John Givner.
Oh, that's actually a planning commission.
Yeah.
Yes, and the planning and the planning commission is going to be taking this up soon?
The Planning Commission has already taken it up and voted on it. If you make this amendment, it goes back to the Planning Commission and we reschedule it.
Okay, so in that case, I think that we would probably want it to come back to committee maybe next week so we can...
What was the Planning Commission's finding first?
It was a recommendation of approval with some modifications which I believe were made, and they did not discuss doing a DR instead of a CU. It didn't.
What my motion is for the duplicated file that's not moving out of committee today, that we change the 1 year to 3 years, that we continue it 1 week so that we can make the mandatory DR amendments next week. And then at that point, we can make a motion to re-refer to the Planning Commission, which I think would be required. Is that right, Mr. Givner? Would that be required?
I think it depends on the specifics of what that amendment will look like, which we can work with your office on over the course of the next week.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. So that's my motion, changing 1 year to 3 year, and then continuing the duplicated file 1 week.
And through the chair, if I may, Supervisor Wiener, does your amendment for DR only apply to unwarranted units, or does it apply to all legal or illegal units?
We'll work with the city attorney over the next week to figure that out. Thank you.
Just to clarify, I was under the impression that it was for single-family homes with unauthorized units, but Supervisor Wiener will be working with planning on that. But if I could just be apprised of what the scope of that would be, that was what I had heard that the changes you were proposing were going to be about.
We'll keep your office closely apprised.
Okay, Supervisor Wiener has made a motion. Supervisor Peskin, I haven't really heard you on this. You're ready to vote on this? All right. So there's a motion. Madam Clerk, do you need me to restate it, or do you have it?
I do have it.
You have it. Fantastic. All right. Without objection, that this motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay.
Oh, Madam Chair, you do need to take action on the original legislation, though. You made the amendments. You accepted the amendments.
I think we made a motion and we accepted the amendments to the original legislation, correct?
And you need to make a recommendation.
All right. We make a recommendation to forward with a positive recommendation. Thank you. To the full board. All right. Without objection, this motion passes also. You're welcome. Okay. Madam Clerk.
Item number 5 is a hearing on the status of the oversized vehicle pilot program, including updates, how they have worked, and whether they should be expanded.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, colleagues. 4 years ago, I worked along with Supervisor Tang to pass the oversized vehicle. Actually, I think it was Supervisor Chu before it was Supervisor Tang, to pass the oversized vehicle parking restriction legislation, which sought to simply ease the pressure in certain neighborhoods and on some businesses that had at the time seen an influx in large vehicles parking for days, weeks, and oftentimes months at a time. After the pilot program concluded in 2013, we held a hearing to discuss its effectiveness. At this hearing, we received a report, which you should have a copy before you. This report You've received a copy of this report this morning for your reference. The report details the success and the effectiveness of the program at several locations throughout the city and county of San Francisco. Some months ago, SFMTA board, which has the sole authority to accept streets into the program, indicated that it would no longer accept any additional streets into the program until the city determined a long-term solution for homelessness. While I'm sensitive to the needs of the people that are both homeless and on the streets, and particularly those that are vehicularly housed, I fear that we're creating a climate that doesn't allow businesses to operate safely and further exacerbates the unsustainable problem and perpetuating an unsafe living environment for traditionally housed individuals as well as vehicularly housed individuals. So there have been several unfortunate reports of drug sales, sex trafficking, rape, and other illicit behavior, one of which includes an explosion of an oversized vehicle in the design center. Pedestrians have documented harassment as well as assault. This is a hearing that's not only completely overdue to the individuals, but it's due for our city to have this conversation. We need to acknowledge our part in the culture that we're creating by not addressing the problem in a real substantive way. So today I've lined up several presenters that will provide an update on the situation and hopefully offer some solutions. I want to first bring up Mr. Andy Thornley, who's a senior project analyst from the Sustainable Streets Division here with the San Francisco SFMTA. And before we hear from Andy Thornley, I want to acknowledge Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for calling this hearing on oversized vehicles. I remember when we passed this legislation several years ago under your leadership and then Supervisor Chu's leadership, we heard from many, many members of the community and neighborhoods that were being impacted by these large vehicles. And this wasn't just a minor issue, it was a significant issue. And I have to say, I was, and I know we'll get into a discussion during the hearing, when I saw the statistics about basically the complete collapse in enforcement by the MTA of these restrictions. The MTA has basically apparently decided just to abandon them entirely. I was really surprised. And this has real-life consequences, and it's not just limited to the oversized vehicle issue. We know that we have a very, very problematic situation on Division Street with the proliferation of hundreds of tents that make it harder and impossible to walk on the sidewalks, and that have created significant issues around health, safety, and sanitation for the occupants of the tents, for surrounding residents, for surrounding businesses. And we know that the city, in my view, has adopted a deer-in-the-headlights approach of just being frozen, despite the very good work of some of our social services agency, like the Office of Hope and Human Services Agency, Department of Public Health. The city as a whole is basically frozen in addressing this issue. We've seen on Division Street and elsewhere an additional lack of enforcement by the MTA around oversized vehicles, where, for example, on Division Street, it has been reported to me by a merchant in the area that there are vehicles that have not been moved in 4 or 5 years, that are in the same exact spot that they were in 4 or 5 years ago, have not been moved. We have vehicles that are being used as meth labs. We had an explosion, and the lack of enforcement is really problematic. We need to transition people into shelter, into housing. It's not humane, it's not compassionate to allow this situation to continue to exist. And so again, I want to thank Supervisor Cohen for calling this oversight hearing so we can talk with the MTA about why it is that they decided not to do any enforcement.
All right, thank you very much. Andy Thornley, you're up.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Actually, this is Hank Wilson, Parking Policy Manager from the MTA, standing in for Mr. Thornley for the presentation. Andy's here in case you guys have any questions that stump me. So I'll whip through this as fast as I can, and I'm sure that the questions will be most interesting to everybody. Just a little context for sort of how we got here. Of course, MTA is responsible for providing and regulating transportation in San Francisco, which includes regulating parking, There's over 900 miles of curb.
I'm sorry, can you
available
speak
for-
a little bit, either a little louder or closer to the mic so we can hear you?
Sure, sorry about that.
Perfect.
There are a lot of tools that the MTA has to regulate access to the curb, including things like meters, time limits, blue zones, green zones, all that sort of stuff. And there are a lot of regulations already on the books that regulate and in most cases prohibit the storage of private property on public streets, things in the Public Works and the Police Code saying you can't put stuff on the streets, and also rules saying you can't park overnight, things like that. And there, of course, as the supervisors referred to earlier, there have been issues around oversized vehicles parking overnight in San Francisco, which led to this oversized vehicle parking restriction, which you can see a little information about on the slide here. MTA implemented about 46 miles of restrictions out of, like I said, 900 blocks in the city, 900 miles of parkable curb in the city. That's about 5% of the blocks have been signed with this oversized vehicle restriction. As Supervisor Cohen said, there was a pilot project that concluded in November of 2013, and there's a report available on the website for that. This is a map that shows the blocks that have been signed with the oversized vehicle restriction. And this is a chart that shows enforcement of the oversized vehicle restriction in the months since July 2013. And Supervisor Wiener referenced the MTA not enforcing anymore. And as you can see from the chart, enforcement does drop off considerably. A couple notes there. One is that the vast majority of citations are written by the PD. The restriction is from midnight to 6 a.m., where the MTA doesn't have a lot of parking control officers out on the streets. So it's mostly the PD that are writing these tickets. And our impression from talking with the police department is that the drop-off in tickets written is actually because the program has been successful where it exists. So where there are signs restricting oversized vehicles, they have moved along. The issue is that they have moved to the next block over or 2 blocks over or the next neighborhood over where there aren't any signs, and so there's no violation happening. And again, that was the conclusion from the pilot evaluation, that it is very effective where the signs are, but the problem is that it's just pushing the issue from one block to the next without a comprehensive solution, and of course brings up issues of vulnerable folks living in their cars. And that's, I think, what brought us about 9 months ago to a point where the MTA board indicated that continuing to approve these spot sort of restrictions on one block here and there, they were not inclined to continue to approve those as long as it was simply moving the issue around from one block to the next or one neighborhood to the next, rather than a more comprehensive solution, something citywide that could be applied across the city. And of course, we've heard both at MTA board meetings and at Board of Supervisors hearings.
Excuse me
sure.
for interrupting your presentation. We've got a question.
Yes,
Supervisor
thank you, Madam Chair. So just a question in terms of enforcement. I understand the comment about you say they're not enforcing because it's been successful and they're no longer on these blocks. Apart from the streets that are covered by this specific program, in terms of just overall enforcement on these larger vehicles, I mentioned at the beginning along Division Street having some vehicles that have been there for a very long time. Some apparently don't even run anymore. Does that get enforced?
You know, I'd have to ask Cameron Sammy, who's the head of enforcement, to be totally sure about that. I know, of course, there's the 72-hour parking rule, which applies citywide, that says you can't leave a car anywhere for more than 72 hours.
That's what it says.
What's that?
That's what it says.
Right. And so whether they're getting enforced against specific vehicles or on specific blocks, I couldn't comment now, but I could certainly find out that information.
Yeah, I'd like to just make that inquiry if the agency could respond. That would be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. One other note, I referenced regulations that are already on the books that restrict the sort of some of the behavior that we're talking about. Car camping has been illegal since the 70s, not often enforced. But what it does do is make things a little more complicated in trying to come up with solutions. For instance, I think some folks have suggested creating zones where oversized vehicles can go and park and sort of be allowed to do that. But as long as living in vehicles is technically illegal in San Francisco, it makes it harder for the MTA or any other agency to recommend something like that when we sort of be recommending doing something that's not allowed under the code. The most interesting possible solution that has come up is what's called safe parking, where partnering with churches that have parking lots that are willing to have folks come on, drive their vehicles onto their lots for the night, have a safe place to park. We have reached out to various stakeholders who we think would be helpful with that. Haven't made a lot of headway so far, and I think that's one thing where, as the MTA, we are happy to help and support that as best we can, but don't feel, as the transportation agency, that we should be the leading agency on something like that, because it's a larger issue that doesn't just relate to transportation or to parking. All that being said, we will, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are still lots of regulations out there that we use all the time to make sure that there's turnover at the curb, to make sure people are moving along in a timely fashion for lots of reasons, and those are still available for us to use in places where we need people moving along as soon as quickly. Sure.
Right, but and I know, again, I've now made an inquiry, but what I'm hearing, I don't know about my colleagues, is that is not the case in terms of requiring that turnover. I mentioned Division Street. There are vehicles that have been there for years and have not moved. Some don't work. And apparently MTA is not addressing that or doing that enforcement. And I completely understand, yes, MTA is not responsible for resolving homelessness in San Francisco, but MTA does manage our roads and does play a role. And I don't agree that MTA should somehow throw up its hands and say, until you all solve this problem that's been vexing San Francisco and so many of our residents, with people dying on our streets for 30, 40 years, for a long time, that MTA is not going to perform that management role. It has real consequences. And so I just want to express that frustration with what MTA apparently has unilaterally decided to do. This board passed legislation for a reason, to give MTA the tools to be able to address a real issue. And we're hearing on the one hand, you saying, well, the problem's been solved, and that's why there are no citations being issued. On the other hand, you're hearing, well, we don't want to enforce it because someone else needs to address it. That seems inconsistent to me.
I have a question. Is Cameron here?
He is not. He was unable to make it today.
He was okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want, for the record, the people, ironically, who are responsible for this, particularly what you're talking about, Supervisor Wiener, in terms of enforcement, are unable to be here, and they've been noticed about this for at least 2 weeks. Longer than that, 30 days when this request was made. I agree with you, Supervisor Wiener. The enforcement sucks, and they need to do a better job of it. But let's reserve our questions. Let's get through this presentation so we can continue to move forward, and we'll save our questions for the end. All right?
Thank you. And I'm almost, I have, just this as the last slide. I would say, just in response to Supervisor Wiener's point, is that, and I apologize if I wasn't clear, that what we're saying is on the blocks where there are signs, it is effective. That the oversized vehicles tend to move along off that block. We don't have the issue on that block anymore, but there might be 1 block, 2 blocks over, a few blocks over, where we don't have signs, that the issue persists. And so that's I think the problem. And then, of course, starting about 9 months ago, the MTA board hasn't been approving any new signs, so that's where we find ourselves in
Supervisor Wiener.
And I'm sorry, in terms of the decision not to put up new signs, because obviously if you're living on one of those blocks, the MTA is now saying, okay, it's not okay here, but it's okay there. What is the rationale of the MTA and of the board of directors in terms of not approving an increase in any of the zones?
The impression that I've gotten is that it's two-pronged. There is the issue of the vehicularly housed, which we've discussed, and then what I also referred to, which is that because it's a spot solution, or it addresses only 1 block at a time, that we end up just moving the issue around, and that until there's a more comprehensive solution, It could be that this rule applies citywide, or it could be something completely different. But until there's something that's more comprehensive and more citywide, that's the issue.
Excuse me, sir. What's your name again?
My name is Hank Wilson.
And how long have you been with the MTA?
I've worked at the MTA for about 6 years, but I've been in the parking group for the past few months.
For the past few months. So, with all due respect, we'd love to have Andy Thornley up here, who's been working with us on this for a little bit of time, who knows the issue. Get up here, Andy. Quit playing. Put this poor man up here. Do your work. Thank you. I appreciate your presentation, but this is serious. Andy's been with this for at least the last 3 years that I know. He knows the issues. He knows the challenges. We've worked on Showplace Square. We worked on parking meters. We worked on a lot of stuff here. So, Mr. Williams, I don't mean to be disrespectful to you, please, but Andy Thornley, come on.
Good afternoon, Supervisors.
Thank
Andy
you.
Thornley with the SF Municipal Transportation Agency. Indeed, I'm the young staffer who brought this thing forward on behalf of the Board of Supervisors back in 2013. And Mr. Wilson has told you very succinctly where we are now, but we have a number of problems we're dealing with. First, to Supervisor Wiener's point, even without this particular section of the Transportation Code, it is illegal in San Francisco to leave a vehicle parked for over 72 hours. That's an entirely complaint-driven process, but it sounds like there have been plenty of complaints that have come to those vehicles on Division. Cameron Sammy couldn't be here. He was called away in an emergency, but he will be here for the GAO hearing Thursday. And so he will be present, and I know he will be ready to answer the questions about this and other things, and I apologize for him not being here. This specific tool has proven to be problematic, as some expected back in 2013, that because it does not deal with every block, it tends to squeeze the balloon and push it down the street. We saw this on the Great Highway. We signed the Great Highway. We signed the edges of Golden Gate Park. Very quickly, the problem went away. The fishing boats, the landscape trucks, the occupied vehicles moved away from those places where this tool was used, sometimes just a few blocks inland. And we would sign it there, and it would go a little further, and it would go a little further. This body, the Board of Supervisors in 2004, took up the idea of a citywide blanket overnight prohibition on oversized vehicles. I understand that Portland, Oregon has a rule like that. I don't know how well it's enforced. But the idea that there is a consistent citywide prohibition on leaving anything on the street that's that large overnight makes it more transparent, makes it more predictable, makes it clearer to everybody. Every police officer on night duty would know that that vehicle shouldn't be there, whether it's Marina Boulevard or Division. We do, as Mr. Wilson pointed out, have many other tools that will cause the churn. And in Showplace Square in District 10, we are bringing forward parking management changes that will be 4-hour time limits all day long, with or without meters. And that will have an effect on turning over that is, we think, going to be efficient and will cause everyone to move along, not just somebody in a school bus. So without this particular problematic tool, if you will, we have other tools that we can and will use, and we are bringing them forward. But to our taste, professionally, we think that this body probably should revisit the notion of a citywide overnight ban on oversized vehicles, just because it would make it more clear, more fair, and more consistent. It has its political perils, there's no question. But to ask the MTA to go as a spot treatment, we really are at some point probably going to have these signs in every block of the city if we can get past the politics of worrying about the displacement. So the enforcement of the 72-hour rule is certainly a sensitivity. I hear folks all the time complain, as you have, that that vehicle has been there for a month. And Cameron will tell you how his team works on that particular problem. But having an enforcement tool that is complaint-based is probably not the most efficient way to attack this problem. So I can answer other questions, but that's my grasp of where we stand with this right now.
And so when it's reported to me by people who, are on Division, for example, that there are vehicles, large vehicles that have been there for a very long period of time, how some of them don't even function anymore. How does that happen?
I have no explanation or excuse. It seems to me pretty clear that after 2 weeks, that should be too much time to tolerate that. And I think we've got a member of the police department who can speak to the practical business of what the police department sees and dealing with this stuff as well. The MTA is basically watching this stuff during the day and the police department in the evening. I can't explain to you or excuse how a vehicle that can't be started could sit parked on a city street that long.
I can appreciate that you're not the best person for this particular issue, but I mean, I can speak intimately to the Division Street. I personally have made requests for a removal of a vehicle starting on February 7th. Mm-hmm. February 7th, and to this day, just this morning, it is still sitting there. And it sits, ironically, right under a sign that says no oversized vehicle parking. Now, it's not so much of an enforcement issue from the police department. The police will go out and enforce when and where told. My frustration lies within the MTA, with who directs the enforcement arm on where to go and when to go. And when it's just frustrating coming off the heels of a great event like the Super Bowl, where there was tons of enforcement going on in a certain part of the city, whereas other parts of the city still remain to languishing prior to the Super Bowl, and now here we are several weeks out, still languishing, and it's incredibly disrespectful and frustrating. I also want the public to know that we invited the MTA Board President Tom Nolan and Vice President Cheryl Brinkman. I don't see them here today, but they were also extended an invitation, particularly given that they're in leadership positions on the MTA Commission. Supervisor Wiener, I know I cut you off. Do you have any further questions?
No, I just comment, and then I'll thank you for indulging my comments today.
No problem.
This is an important issue, as you know, better than I do.
I do know. So I have a few questions to pose to you, Mr. Thornley.
Okay. I'll reserve my comment until after your questions.
Thank you, sir. Is there any specific policy in place that prevents the new authorization of postings prohibiting parking for oversized vehicles?
No, it's a standard tool in the Transportation Code. As you know, since, I guess, 2007, Proposition A, the MTA Board of Directors has more or less exclusive authority, so those decisions, whether stop sign or red curb, come through the MTA's Board of Directors.
So the other thing is, given that the mayor has made this big announcement to create a Department of Homelessness, and there have been some solutions discussed, and I might be jumping the gun a little bit. I see Sam Dodge in the audience, and but we have been having some discussion about moving some of these vehicles to Pier 80. I don't know if you yourself have been to Pier 80. If not, but there's a large amount of space available to park some of these vehicles that we should begin to explore. Now, if recollection serves me correctly, I think the MTA Commission said we are going to stop the pilot program until we figure out a long-term strategy on where we can park vehicles. Well, we need to begin to revive that conversation, because it looks like we've identified a location on Pier 80. Will Pier 80 be able to house every vehicle? No, not at all. But perhaps there's a bit by invitation only, or there's some kind of a special consideration or some kind of a system that can be developed by those who know the issues intimately. Particularly, I'll be listening to hear from the advocates to hear what they know and see on the ground, and how we can move some of maybe our worst offenders' vehicles from the streets to Pier 80. The challenge from what I see around Division in particular, as well as San Bruno Avenue and Vermont and just the Showplace Square area, is that not only are people just living there, but also there's concerns with human excrement being dumped, and I think that poses a particular health and safety hazard that really warrants our attention. Now, I don't know of any other parts of the district, parts of San Francisco that gets as much media attention as Division. Certainly, I haven't zeroed in because it's on the border of my district as well as Supervisor Kim's district. But Division is an area that we are concentrating our time and our resources and finding out what the needs are of the community. Now, we all agree the homeless community's needs are not a blanket. It's not a blanket solution. It's individual, and we are actively working with the HOT team as well as Sam Dodge's team. So my question is pretty specific. Has the commission calendared, or will be taking up the item of revisiting the discussion of a citywide policy of overnight vehicle enforcement?
That has not been, that's not a topic that's come up at the MTA's Board of Directors that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I think the MTA staff and board would be very open. You can hear me advocating more than I ought to, perhaps, that I think that that's a very strong idea. As I say, back in 2004, the full Board of Supervisors deliberated that idea but didn't adopt it. And I did not go back to study what the points were made, but I can kind of guess at them. Right. But I think that staff at the MTA would be supportive, certainly, of talking about it and exploring that.
Thank you.
My understanding, if I could revisit or just come back to the MTA's Board of Directors' reluctance to approve any further use of this specific tool is not conditioned on a specific outcome, but they have said that they're not comfortable pushing the problem around. They're not comfortable just displacing what may be vulnerable people living in vehicles. And again, I'm looking into their minds but listening to what they've said. But that they want to see some effort made at some relief. And so the idea of a safe parking pilot, knowing that it wouldn't solve the whole problem, but let's start to work on a possible potential partial answer. They have asked to see that, and again, I know Sam is here and may be able to speak to some of what's happened. Constituents in your district have sat with me and with Sam to talk about whether we could do something like that in District 10. MTA is very open, but as Hank said, it's not likely that we would lead it. I don't think you'd want the MTA to run that program, but we're very ready to support that. But we know that that's not going to be the solution to the problem. We also just have our hands full managing all of the transportation in the city without also starting another program like that. But indeed, if this oversized vehicle ban was struck from the transportation code, there are another 10 or 12 things that we could be and are using to get people to take turns with the curb. And so this particular tool may have come to its full useful life. It may not be the right tool to use. We certainly need to look more at the 72-hour rule. To Supervisor Wiener's point, it's disgraceful and it's inexcusable that there would be any vehicle parked that long, especially if it can't operate as a vehicle. There's no reasonable excuse for having that be so, and we will certainly not only look at that but act on that. That's again, inexcusable. Finally, Division Street is having improvements made to it, and I'm cheered to see various safety improvements for pedestrian and bicycle traffic along Division. And as we bring forward changes for Showplace Square parking management, we will be making changes that are going to cause a turnover. This oversized vehicle tool, frankly, is a last resort. If there's a piece of curb that has a better answer for management, meters, time limits, resident permit, we should be using that, and we have. And obviously, if there's a problem of persistent storage and abandonment of vehicles, we need to act on that right away. There's no question.
You brought up an interesting point. You brought up Showplace Square. I know that we've been working on it for over a year, a parking management strategy. How close are we to rolling it out?
We're very close. I will knock on this wood. On March 3rd, that's next Friday, there will be a public hearing where we present to the public the changes that have been proposed and worked out with stakeholders in your district. And I'm comfortable and confident that the hearing will go well and that we will take that proposal or the set of proposals to the MTA's Board of Directors on April 5th. And then if they are so pleased, and I think they will be, work orders will go out and we'll get time limits and meters going, and Division will get a little bit of treatment there. And I think there will be a blank piece of Division that we won't yet have put something on, and we'll come back to that very quickly.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Supervisor Wiener, wanted to give you a chance for, nope. Supervisor Peskin, anything for you? No? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. I think we're going to hear from Sam Dodge next.
Thank you, Supervisor. Sam Dodge, Mayor's Office of Hope. Can I use the overhead?
Sure. SFGov TV, you need the overhead? Thank you.
I don't know if you can read this, but this was something that came across my little RSS feed, and it's about Sly and the Family Stone. Is about him getting $5 million, but it's not that. It's that he's living out of his van. He's a famous San Franciscan, living in Crenshaw now.
I do remember that story.
But he is living out of his van, and it's an RV, and that's where he is right now. And we do our point in time count here. I'll put this up there too. I don't know if people can see that, but on the far right hand side there, this is a count that we do every 2 years as a HUD mandate. Every city does it to pull down federal funds to fund our homeless programs. And we do a complete census of the street as well as all our programs. And, we found a significant drop in the 2 years previous to our current count, from 13% of the homeless living in vehicles to 4%. And when I say 4%, we're talking about 275 people. That's quite a big number, even if it's only 4% of our homeless population. And, working with the HOT team, we are going and trying to engage with people living in RVs and vehicles all the time. And, in District 10 right now, we're tracking 68 RVs. That's not including vans or other vehicles that people may be living in. And so District 10 is particularly impacted by people living in RVs. And District 2, for example, we know of 8 RVs living at the Marina Green. But this is not a good solution, and it's not one thing, as you mentioned. There's just a lot of different people that go to living in a car as a solution for the high housing prices here in the city. I had a close friend of mine who got sick of the high rents and thought it would be a great idea to live in a trailer by Ocean Beach, and this didn't work out very long for him, about 6 months, and the cops were moving him, and it was the wrong solution. But I'm just saying, this is a working person. A friend of mine tried to talk him out of this, and this was years ago now, but I just want to say that it's not some sort of alien.
Now?
Right now,
What's
he's
the end of the story?
He's moved to Tucson, and he's a teacher there, teaching math in Tucson.
Living in a house?
In a house.
Yeah.
Yes, okay. He was a carpenter here. But so I just will say it can be, so when we're trying to tackle this and look into various solutions, it is difficult because, I do see these, some that are, completely stuffed to the gills and clearly symptomatic of a lot of things going on in someone's life. I do see some that seem to be involved in drug trafficking and other things. Not to say that that's a typical situation. Those are just incidences of disorder that really do complicate situations like division and others, where there can be some of these and there can be other people that are in a tight spot and in between and feel more safe in their car than in a shelter. And so it's hard to apply a blanket rule and intervention for everyone that's using a car as temporary shelter. And it should be temporary. And this is a question about how we want to go and what kind of policies and procedures we want to kind of open up. This isn't just a San Francisco problem. Very closely we have West Oakland that has many RVs and people living in cars. Down the peninsula, it's very common for people to experience homelessness in their vehicles. And some of our close communities do provide some hints at some programs that can be effective. And so Monterey and Sonoma County are 2 counties that have safe parking programs. And what they do is they partner with a church, or in Sonoma County, they use the county fairgrounds, and they work together with people that are living in their cars and social work organizations like Catholic Charities in Monterey to help make sure that people can transition from their car back into the community and regular housing stock. So one of the opportunities we had recently was to meet with Spot On Parking. And people don't know, Spot On Parking helps manage parking for churches and other institutions, schools, and they help to rent out overnight spots or low usage times for these different institutions. And they had suggested that they have some properties that don't have a high market value, and they would like to be able to offer them as part of a safe park program. So for me, it's really important that we go and we talk to people that are living in vehicles and say, hey, this would be something that we try to make real, but would this work for you? Is this an answer that would be a solution to what you're facing? And our initial discussions with a small group of people was that no, because just to be overnight was not the answer. They needed to be somewhere more long-term. And so the Spot On, and we're going to still roll out some larger focus groups to see if there is some part of the population that would rather come off the street and be safely parked someplace and to attach to services so we can transition them out of the cars. But initially it was not well received. And so, you know, some of this is iterations, making sure people understand what we're actually talking about and that it could be good. And there is always, with rolling out of new programs, some hesitance about, oh, is this, you know, a good or bad thing? And often people see it as a really good thing. I mean, you know, we discussed briefly Pier 80, and Pier 80 is a good example where, you know, the first group that we invited in was a little hesitant and weren't so excited about it. But, you know, just this last week, we were able to invite in 60 people off of Division Street and oversubscribed, and we're going to be able to still take in another 25 today and more on Tuesday and another 25 on Wednesday. And so it's become exciting. It's become acceptable and a great alternative. So I think similarly with a sort of safe park program, we could turn that corner, but not without the voice of those that are living in cars. And so I've been working together with a work group from the coalition who has been working for many years on this issue with the community of people living in cars. And with Martin DePores, we're hoping to do a focus group, especially because District 10 and that area is so impacted with this issue. So I guess I'll stop there and answer questions.
Good, thank you. I do want to compliment you guys for being aggressive and moving folks out. Pier 80 is growing, and I think that's a good thing.
Thank you.
I think we still have work to do to make Pier 80 warm and hospitable.
Yeah.
Been working with my staff and constituents on getting volunteers that would be willing to come and be a part of the effort. So there's a couple things. Thank you for, I guess, describing to us your efforts about where you are and what you've been doing. And the main point that I want to communicate is that that the legislation calls for providing space for overnight parking in RVs and other large vehicles. And can you, or I know you didn't mention this in your brief summary, but Spot On. Yeah. I don't know if there's a representative from Spot On here today.
We did invite them. They weren't able to get back.
All right. You know what? I'm just going to take it personal that all these people that I invited did not come. To me, that communicates the lack of seriousness that they're taking with this issue. So heads are going to roll.
Okay, we'll do it.
Mark my words on that one. So maybe you can describe to us a little bit about what Spot On you're doing in your partnership, and then also give us some idea of where the available locations are where people can take advantage of how many spots there are, how many large vehicles have been taking advantage of these available spaces in the last few years.
So Spot On is not open this program. They just came to us and said, hey, this is something that we have, these assets. Not all of them are being able to be utilized in the private market because there's a lot of free street parking in the area that a church may have a lot. But for us, you know, street parking is kind of the problem. So a place where you can go and not be harassed is a kind of would be something nice to be able to offer, and we could augment it with, you know, outreach staff in connection to services and possibly toilet access and other shower access and other kind of pieces of the puzzle that allows people to, clearly they're preferring their vehicle to our traditional shelter services, which we offer continuously. but that we can still work with people towards resolving their houselessness without them having to come into our shelters. And so Spot On was offering these some of them were, it's various lots around the city. So a lot of church spaces, some schools, some like the overnights at SF State they work with, or some that were around Balboa. The City College parking there. There was various ones, but we weren't talking about any one in particular. It was just this concept of, does an overnight spot where you have to leave in the morning when it comes back into its regular use, is that a good intervention? Is that enough? Does that meet the threshold of people's needs? And so this is our point, to do focus groups with people and to see what is enough. Like, this is what they're offering, so maybe if it's not enough on itself, how can we incentivize it from a city perspective? What kind of services should we enrich to make it work?
I think where I'm starting to get frustrated with this hearing is that I keep hearing all these high-level big plans and good ideas. That's not what this is about. This is about the details. So I don't really want to hear about focus groups. I want to hear that we've got a focus group study, we've got a focus group committed, we've got them coming in. I want to hear a timeline. I want to hear some tangibles. I want to hear some quantitative data so that when we can benchmark, here we are today on February 22nd, and in 1 month's time we can expect this, in 6 months' time we can expect this. So I'm getting super frustrated because I'm not hearing what I need to hear. So Spot On is not on board. What does it take to get them on board? How many large vehicles? You said there's 68 in District 10, but do you know how many are across the entire city?
Well, on our last point in time count, it was 275.
275. How many are at Pier 80?
0.
What does it take to get them over there? All 275 of them.
Well, I mean, where we work with shelters is a certain ratio for bathrooms and toilets and showers to occupants.
Fair enough.
So
what is that ratio?
It's 20-1 for toilets.
Okay, so what is that with 275? Given the number of folks that you have already there?
Yeah, when we get to 150 by Wednesday, we will be at the ratio for the toilets.
Okay.
So it would mean really expanding toilet access there to the amount of cars.
So have you started the process to expand toilets?
We've been talking about that and seeing how we could expand. Typically, I don't really like to open very big shelters. 150 is pretty big. It's a lot of people and it's a lot to manage. But that is a huge site that could accommodate multiple types of things happening there. So we have started to look at what it would take to expand toilet access and what the plumbing and showers, if that's possible.
Can you give me your expert advice as to why you don't like to open up large shelters?
Because we sort of back into a certain program model that gets to be more controlling and punitive and tight rules and entry, just the volume of people and safety. We kind of back ourselves up into needing more and more security and that kind of model, which does sort of undermine our efforts larger to help people that are in crisis and under a lot of stress, and to try to get through and to find the other side to that. When we have these large kind of shelter models like we have at MSC South and next door, with lots of people in one location and the security and tight rules, it becomes hard to...
So what do we do? Open up a whole bunch of small ones?
That is a better practice, I believe. Hard to cite, as you well know. Just like with the previous hearing, when it comes to even citing small in-law units and, to cite, anti-poverty programs is very difficult.
So what I'd like you to start to do, you and your HOPE team and advisors and advocates, start to think about a way to come up with a strategy to pull some of the oversized vehicles off the street and into Pier 80. As of right now, I know that there isn't a strategy, which is why there's 0 on site. And ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that have not been to Pier 80, it is a ginormous hangar. very, very large, with very large parking space in the industrial part of San Francisco, on kind of the northern part of the Bayview community, off of 3rd Street, not near any residential. So it's a unique asset that the port owns, which means the city has ownership and title to it. So I think we need to really come up with a strategy on how we can best utilize the asset. Yes. Colleagues, I don't know if there's anyone else that have any questions or comments for Mr. Dodge, who's got an incredible task ahead of him. Thank you. I want you to feel appreciated. You got important work to do, and we're depending on you to be successful. So you let us know what you need from us as city to provide you what you need to get out there and to help us help people. Okay.
Thank you.
In a humane way.
Back to you.
All right. Thank you. Get back to us on that. So I asked a Caltrans representative, Robert House, who I met with about a month ago with Assembly Member David Chu, to join us in this meeting. He is unable to be here. At this particular meeting that I had a few weeks ago, we identified a Caltrans property underneath the 101 freeway that could potentially be leased to the city and county of San Francisco from the state for a nominal cost to large vehicles to park safely under the freeway. Unfortunately, he had to report to jury duty today, and he's not able to make it, but we'll continue to work with him to lease space to provide a refuge for large vehicles to park off city streets. So we're aggressively moving in that direction. I don't know if there's any other colleagues that have any other questions or comments. If not, I think we should go to public comment and hear what folks are thinking. I've got a stack of cards that I'd like to invite people to come up and participate. Just as a reminder, everyone has 2 minutes. What? PD, you have a presentation? Okay. Absolutely. Come on up. My apologies. Please come on in. And
no need to apologize, ma'am. Supervisors, people of San Francisco, I'm Officer Green, Bayview Station. I'm the Homeless Outreach Officer for the Bayview District. I'm here on behalf or on order of Captain Vaswani to take notes for the meeting and give any presentation that you need. I have working knowledge of the issue of the large vehicles, the 22 hours, how effective the signs are for those blocks that they are on. It's an absolutely wonderful tool for me to enforce. All I have to do often is just point to the sign, talk to the resident of the vehicle, and they will move. However, I cannot control where they move to, and that, again, is the big issue. As far as MTA and DPT working on the 72-hour, Traffic Code 7.2.29, especially on the area of College Arts, 15th and Carolina, when it belonged to the Bayview, I would hammer that area with those notices. But I'd often find that DPT has beaten me to that, as well as the northern end of Dogpatch Park. Unfortunately, there just seems to be far more vehicles than I have forms or time to enforce. And then when they move, the issue is they're still in the city somewhere else, and I have to respond to the complaint where they show up. So I've tracked my regulars. In the last 7 months I've been working as a homeless officer, I have about 21 regulars living in RVs in just the Bayview District alone. Some of them I've had great help from Mr. Dodge in trying to get the homeless outreach teams to speak to provide services. But a lot of them are basically in a semi-permanent living status. They're just trapped. They are waiting to get into housing. Or, as Mr. Dodge did mention about the problem with the large shelters, is you gather that many people together, fights tend to break out, fights and thefts, so it becomes a security issue. And police arrive up, most of the homeless don't want to show up where the police are, and so next thing you know, those camps get vacated because they want to go away from authority. So we're still chasing our tail there, and those are the issues we're facing. But the big thing about the 72-hour hold and the division, I have no excuses for that, Supervisor Wiener. I'll drive over there and tag that vehicle myself and follow up on Thursday. If it's still there, I'll tow it as abandonment. That is a tool. Just last month in the Bayview, MTA did a big sweep of the Bayview. We had 3 teams, an officer involved with each of the DP teams, and tow trucks to take what's called scofflaw, vehicles abandoned, out of compliance with registration, or obviously unable to move, missing parts. It took us a better part of the day. We only got to 1/3 of the district, took 85 cars out, filled the storage yards, and still couldn't, and just put a dent in that problem. So it's basically a big issue of cleaning up those details. As far as Pier 80, I don't see any facilities that most of the RV people need, such as sewage hookups. That's a big thing. As you know, on the streets, not only fecal matter, but kitchen grease, associated triads, it becomes a huge hazard. All I can do is enforce and hit with those 72-hour notices. But at Pier 80, I don't see any receptacles for the vehicles. That might want to be brought up to the people. How do you assess and get the vehicles in and out?
Okay.
Is there anything else I can help with?
No, I appreciate your report. Let this be an example. He had numbers and data. Now that's a report.
Well,
I appreciate
I followed
it.
up on there, ma'am.
Thank you. What I want you to do for me is stop by my office. We will give you the license plate, the car,
Yes, ma'am.
and all the information for this one particular vehicle that has been the center of this discussion.
Roger
okay?
that, ma'am.
Thank you. So I'm hopeful that we have some folks from the coalition in the audience and advocates that can provide some insight and certainly bring their voice to this discussion. Their expertise is just as important to me. All right, I see I've got Martha Thompson from the Design Center, and I have a card from Joshua Leonard, also from the Design Center. Why don't we follow that up with Lisa Marie, Melody, Shira Noel, and Kelly Cutler. Please come on up. Thank you.
Taking time to.
No problem. Just speak in the mic so we can hear you.
All right. Is that better?
Yeah, much better.
I do have one visual to show you. You can see that. To Supervisor Wiener's comment, this is a supposed meth lab blowing up next to the Design Center.
Oh,
and
yes.
across the street is the rubble from this.
As across the street is what?
Is the rubble from this fire that happened, this RV that blew up
Right.
next to the Design Center. This RV that blew up right next to the Design Center. So just thought you'd like to see that to your comment. I'm here today, excuse me, representing the tenants of the Design Center who vary from local makers to high-end showrooms. We've seen an increase in RVs parking in the Showplace area over the past few years. We see families and individuals that we see go to work every day living in these RVs. We've tried to be a part of the solution by reaching out to service providers like Lava May, the Navigation Center, SF Hope, and local vets to offer our support. While we are extremely compassionate about the plight of the community housed in these RVs, there are a few bad actors that are making it very difficult to conduct business at the Design Center. This week is Design Week at the Design Center, so all the people that we know would love to be here to give testimony could not attend. I have a petition on this issue that we circulated in the neighborhood. We got 704 signatures, and I'd like to read to you a few excerpts to provide testimony about how this issue is affecting the neighborhood. Comment 1. This situation with so many old RVs in the Showplace Square area has become dangerous. We had a recent fire in one of them that caught trees on fire and scorched buildings. We have also had fuel spills around the building when they have refueled with large gas cans. Also, there has been an increase in people using the sidewalks for bathrooms. Parking for businesses during the day and for events in the evening is affected, by the 10 to 12 RVs that.
I'm sorry. That's it. But thank you.
Do you want a copy of the petition?
We will take a copy of and we'll put it in the file.
Okay.
The clerk will come collect it. Next speaker, please.
I'm going to use the overhead as well, please. I have some handouts for the supervisors as well.
Overhead projector, SF Gov TV. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Joshua Leonard. I'm here on behalf of ownership and the tenants in partnership with Bay West for the San Francisco Design Center. We have over 120 tenants at the San Francisco Design Center. As Martha mentioned, they are designers, showrooms, and manufacturers. Over the last 3 years, we have seen a massive influx of RVs and homeless encampments in our area. You heard from Andy Thornley and Sam Dodge and Officer Green about other areas getting controls and restrictions, and the problem actually lessening. But the problem is that our area doesn't have any of these controls. So while the problem is lessening, they're concentrated in our area. We have consistently shown at our entrance, at the front of our design center, we consistently see RVs parked across our entrances. These are RVs that people are living in. These are RVs that are interrupting our business. You can see here that the ratio of RVs to cars on a given street is at times almost equal. You see the street covered with RVs. This is affecting our business, it's affecting our tenants, and it's affecting the security in our area. Many of our tenants have shown 60% decreases in traffic counts and in foot traffic. It's directly affecting their sales and their ability to do business in San Francisco. As management and owners of the property, we've seen skyrocketing costs of security. Our tenants do not feel comfortable walking to their cars late at night. We are patrolling the area as well. We've been in consistent dialogue with every group that's been mentioned here, between SF Hope, MTA, MTC, SFPD, and we would love to be part of the solution, but we just don't see one. We've spoken to Caltrans about the lot. We've spoken to SF Hope. I've even spoken to Spot On about these solutions. And while we are compassionate, we would love to see additional progress. The 4-hour parking controls that Andy Thornley mentioned have been in process, as you mentioned, for several years. We still don't see them. We haven't seen them until April. We'd love to see the RV ban get absolutely added to that. It is becoming a major problem in our area. So just to sum up before I run out of time here, the design center, as we see it, has been negatively impacted by these RVs, primarily because they have no other place to go. While we are compassionate, it's directly affecting our ability to do business. Previously, we had a wait list to get into the design center for tenants. Now, when tenants come and do tours for the design centers, for the ground floor spaces, they're confronted by graffiti, at times excrement, and large RVs parked across our entrance. So thank you all for considering this and for the movement that we hope to see on this matter.
Thank you. Let's see, next speaker, Lisa Marie. And Melody. And then
Morning,
Shira.
Supervisors. Kelly Cullors bringing up some things that we packages of papers for you all.
Thank you.
My name is Lisa Marie Alatorre. I'm an organizer with the Coalition on Homelessness, and we've been working on this issue for many years. I've been on the scene since 2012, been working on this issue, and in the packets that we've provided you are not only some fact sheets around who it is living in their car, in their vehicles here in San Francisco, but also what we've seen in terms of the immediate impacts from the oversized vehicle parking ban, and then also a couple of solutions. Obviously, we really want to be solution oriented, so that's what I'm going to really focus on. I definitely hear from everybody that this is a really frustrating situation. People who live in their vehicles are as frustrated as the residents who are dealing with large vehicles in their neighborhoods, and so we really do want to move this to a solution oriented space. We're also frustrated. We've been here since 2012 with these ideas, with these solutions, and have seen absolutely no movement on them. There's even a best practices on safer parking that the Hope Office commissioned from USC 2 years ago. And so there's just a ton of stuff that hasn't happened. Some of the solutions that we have been looking at have to do with creating mechanisms to drop tow charges for those living in their vehicles. So again, people who are living in their vehicles, we are seeing a lot of enforcement. There may not be oversized tickets being given out, but there are 72-hour notices that people are getting consistently, as well as a lot of no sleeping in your vehicle tickets. So those things are being enforced. So while we've seen a decrease in the oversized vehicle parking ban tickets, we've seen an increase in other ways of targeting people who live in their vehicles. In addition, we really would like to see the legislation amended to target commercial vehicles only. When this legislation first came out, it was really about the commercial vehicles. That was what the focus was on, and we really wanted to curb that sort of overuse of public parking, and now it's really turned into an issue around homelessness. And so we think that there's a place where we could be looking at amending the legislation to have it focus on what the issue was at hand. We've talked a lot about it, so I won't go into it, but a safer parking program. Can't say it enough. We support it 100%. We have tons of people who'd be ready to go into it ASAP. The last thing that we would like to see happen would be a full assessment and audit on parking restrictions in San Francisco. We see, in the presentation that SFMTA gave today, they noted that only 5% of the streets have the oversized parking ban. But what they don't note is how many other parking restrictions exist in the city that make it impossible for people with large vehicles to be able to park their vehicles. So we would really like to see a full audit. Where are there places where we could be relieving parking where there is not residents that would be impacted by large vehicles, where there's not businesses that would be impacted by large vehicles, because there are some folks who, for them, it is really temporary. They're here for just a short period of time, or they're living in their vehicles for a short period of time. I also wanted to point out that in terms of a citywide enforcement or a citywide policy on this, Andy noted Portland, Maine as an example. I think Portland just want to expand that and unpack it a little bit. Their citywide ban was really regarding snow plowing, and they've actually had to relieve and open up some areas for parking for up to 100 vehicles. And so they have had to sort of relinquish their citywide ban because they realized that there was such a huge impact and it wasn't feasible. It would be a civil rights nightmare for San Francisco. In addition, we have 275 people living in their vehicles. We can handle that. We can take care of that. That's not a lot of people. There's no reason to be enforcing a citywide ban when we're talking about such a small number of people. Also just want to say that, really want to applaud MTA for the moratorium, for taking a stand, even though we've seen the torch be passed on this issue. We appreciate that.
Lisa Marie, before you go, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
I actually, I think I'm in agreement with you when it comes to 275. I don't think that's it's a fraction when you think about the number of vehicles that are managed, that are on the street. So I would agree with you, and I would push back a little bit with that sentiment that it's a large number, but I don't know enough to know what it would take to house them. You mentioned something in your remarks about a citywide ban, particularly around snow and plowing.
No plowing.
When they pulled these vehicles off the street and they opened up parking for them, how did they manage
where they chose to put the vehicles?
Not only where they chose to put them, but was there the argument that I hear is that it increases the potential for violence, which would increase costs for patrol, and did you see that happen?
Well, they don't have the homeless problem that we have in Portland, Maine.
Okay.
So when they were removing cars, again, it had to do with snow plowing. So people were parking their RVs or their boats sort of on the streets overnight. When there would be a snowstorm, the city snow plowers couldn't get through and clear the streets. And so it's a little bit of a different issue. They weren't dealing with a sort of human issue attached
Thank
to
you
it.
for this packet. I will look seriously and very closely at the solutions that
Thank you very much.
you've laid out. Thanks for being here. Okay, next speaker, please. Melody.
Hello, my name is Melody, and
Hello.
It was good to see you at Dr. Jackson's services.
Thank you.
Sleep is a primary resource needed to make good decisions. Police and meter maids continue to strip us of our right to rest and strip us of our resources to recover from our circumstances. Interrogators in every country know that that total sleep deprivation is a form of torture. My mere existence is breaking the law. These laws and these signs are telling me that I do not have the right to exist. Since these no parking signs have been posted, I am thrust into parking where I'm not safe, nor is my vehicle safe. Drug users, garbage dumping, defecating, urinating all around my vehicle, loss of time and energy cleaning up after them. I've been broken into, my battery stolen, alternator tools, over $1,000 worth of materials and supplies to keep the vehicle in working order. I am treated by the meter maid like I am a criminal. I am spoken to as if I am vermin, criminalized for the very crimes being perpetrated against me. The SFMTA allows its meter maids to terrorize me while insinuating that is for my own good. Allowing this mindset without education nor correction is appalling. Though it is my responsibility, I am not the cause of my homelessness. Again, I ask you for a safe place to park, because without your help and support, I cannot overcome my circumstances, and thus I am a scapegoat of societal hypocrisy, which demands that I overcome my circumstances while stripping me of every single resource required to do so. Thank you very much for your time. And I am a member of the police community meeting in the Bayview since 2009. I'm an Evans campus student since 2009. I'm a NERT volunteer since 2011.
Thank you, Melody. Thank you very much. Shira?
Hi, my name is Shira Noel. I volunteer a lot with the Homeless Coalition. I also work with the Homeless Youth Alliance. We've been seeing since the large vehicle parking ban, we've really been seeing an increase in people losing their vehicles. I've had some of my youth displaced, and just said this is a whole different kind of homelessness. I did have my car, and now I don't, and now I'm on the sidewalk, and now I'm on the concrete. I don't feel safe. And these are, we see, and it's across the board. It's not just the youth. We've been out doing outreach down around Division for a really long time now, and really talking with folks and that are suffering from medical problems, and our senior citizens, and people who have served our country. There's just such a huge spectrum. And what we do when we start pushing people into the one area is the residents of that area become more frustrated. We're perpetuating homelessness. The people start to lose their vehicles, which ends up in more tents. I think Pier 80 would be a great solution as a safer parking program, as long as people actually did feel safer being there. So not having a curfew would be a big thing, and not having it staffed by the sheriff department would also be another huge thing. And then just having adequate.
Who would staff it? If not the sheriff department, then who?
Well, we'd have to sit down at a table and really work that out, but I think that's really possible. I mean, we can do that. We're a really strong community here in San Francisco, and we bring a lot on every side, and I think we could work that out for sure. So I think that those are really big barriers, too, as to why people don't always go, but I think that they're super easy barriers that we could work out. Thanks.
Thank you, Sheriff. Okay, next would be Kelly Cutler, and that's all the cards I have. If there's anyone else that'd like to speak, please write out. Okay, you can speak. Kelly, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kelly Cutler. I'm a human rights organizer with the Coalition on Homelessness, and I've, just like the others that were talking before me, we've all been part of this for a number of years and gone to many meetings, led many focus groups, and we've actually really done our homework. We have provided alternatives, and I've personally explored within faith communities that have been open to this, and they've been open to the idea. The first thing that always comes up is liability. That comes up with everything, you know. And I happen to have a brother that sells church insurance. And so, I know, random, I know. But so I talked to him and I said, listen, I said, you sell church insurance. So what's the liability? Is this something that they can do? And he said that it's actually written into their insurance because churches are expected to be doing this kind of thing. And so we had his attorney, and they said that the city needed to get their attorney to look at things. The problem is that it just hasn't moved forward. They actually pushed the ban through by presenting our alternatives and saying, you know, these are great, and we need to do this, and we're going to do the ban. But they haven't followed through on that. And where there's been the moratorium is specifically because there haven't been alternatives that have been created. But Melody she is amazing, and she's really speaking to really what this is all about. And we can do better. We can, you know, there's not many people, and we can do something. Pier 80, you know, different options like that. People want help. They're not service resistant. They're wanting help and options. Thanks.
Thank you. And I did find some more cards. Mina Young, Brad Anderson, Thad Patridge, Ariel Kelly, and Ian D. So it doesn't matter. You can come on up. Okay.
Hi, my name is Ian. I moved here from New York City and San Francisco in '99. My rent was $300 a month. When it went from not being $300 and non-rent control, it went to $3,800. So I bought myself an RV. Smartest thing I've ever done with my money. I've saved myself so much money. I continue to pay rent, but to myself and into my IRA. I don't like what's going on in the city in terms of the massive amount of homelessness that's happening. I agree that safe parking would be a beautiful thing. In fact, I'm going there tonight. I will go to 80. I will spread the word.
It's not open yet. Don't spread the word yet.
Okay, I won't spread the word, but I applaud the concept therein of it.
We're working on it. Yeah.
The concept of prostitution, drugs, and meth labs, I've been all over this city. I've parked all over this city, and I just don't see it. I've been pink and yellow slipped. My vehicles needed to move after 72 hours. I pick up my girlfriend almost every night at Best Buy, so I'm curious, are you talking about the bus that's on Division? Because other than that...
The bus. No, I'm not talking about it like a school bus, you mean?
Being
the old school bus?
We RV people are habitual parkers.
Mm-hmm.
I like to park in the same space just because I know where my vehicle is. I feel safe there. And it might appear as though we never move, but I think it's more of the reality that we just feel comfortable where we are and we're in a safe zone or close to a Safeway or what have you. So I applaud the safe parking.
Okay, thank you. Ian, before you go, quick question. Have you considered parking your RV in, say, Candlestick RV Park?
I have. That's,
hookups?
to do a month to month, that's almost like paying a rent. It's like $1,800. And to be honest with you, there are very few amenities that we'll need. I mean, I go to the High Sierra Music Festival every year, and they have these essentially dump trucks that come and hook up to your refuse, pulls it all out, refills you with fresh water. It's a very simple process, and completely inexpensive. So what I suggest you do is
completely inexpensive to you.
Well, I don't think so, because my idea is with two huge sports teams in the city, and they, baseball is played at one point, football's played at another point. That's a lot of real estate that's not getting used. So why not turn it into like a state park, where for like a nominal fee, $20, you can stay for 14 days, then you got to go. Then you can come back in after 17 hours, but that way it'll pay for itself.
So I guess my question for you is not so much a big universe question. It's specific to you. You have identified yourself as having someone that you're paying yourself and you're paying into your retirement, so you have some source of income. So why don't you legally comply and park your RV where it's legally sanctioned with the proper hookups instead of being out of compliance and on the street?
Well, a lot of times what I do, I cater for a living, and I travel everywhere. I go from Tahoe to Atherton to L.A., so that won't work for me having a permanent residence. It's much easier for me to have a vehicle that I can take anywhere when I want to go, where I want to go.
So my question is that when you take your vehicle and you go where you go when you want to go, and you come back to San Francisco, instead of parking on the street, why don't you park it in your reserved spot at the designated spot? And I use Candlestick because that's the one RV location that's inside the city and county.
Again, all those spots are almost completely filled up. The place in Candlestick, they don't allow monthlies anymore. They don't even allow dumping there. The only place we're allowed to dump is pretty much Pacifica, and also all of their permanent spots are now filled, not only of which they've lost 30 spots to ocean erosion, so now they don't even have the amount of spots that they used to. So I say use the baseball or Cow Palace or Pier 80. These are great ideas of areas that are very rarely used.
Okay.
So I'm thinking put a food truck there, put a shower bus there, just give us a couple amenities and again, make it relatively inexpensive. For I'd pay $25 to go into any state park. But at least they have the simple amenities like electricity, a dumping zone, some place to take a shower, some place to maybe get on computer. You don't have to go that far. But I mean, if you think about how much money Major League Baseball and the NFL makes, they could basically build a beautiful little permanent structure on their parking lot areas.
Okay, Ian, I got to cut you off because I love how you spend other people's money, but we got to keep this hearing moving. Next speaker.
Madam Chair and Supervisors, good afternoon. My name is Brad Anderson. I'd like to know who would I speak to get information and data on what's been accomplished since 2012, meaning outreach programs, dates, things that have been accomplished. I saw the presentations today, and I didn't see a heck of a lot in the MTA. I mean, I was disappointed. On one hand, I'm great you guys are pursuing this. The second hand, it's 2016. I don't know what's been done. I really don't see the beef here. If people want to keep their jobs, I guess it's a good way to keep the job. If you keep kicking that can down the street and nothing happens, I'd love to have a company like that. But I'd like to see that there was a goal to do this by this date, and we did this. There was a goal to do this, we did this. I would like to know who has that. Is that
when you
MTA?
find it, please share it with me.
Okay. Because I would like to see that because if we keep doing this, we're going to be here in 2012, and Andy's going to have white hair. Hank won't have any hair, and nothing's going to be done. So I would really like to know can I get presentations from either MTA or whoever so I can share with people I know about here's what's happened since 2012, and I want the bullets. I don't need the stuff that was shared today that didn't have facts. I would like to know this was done, and this was accomplished. Who would I go to? Is that MTA? Is it supervisors? Who is it?
I don't know the answer to your specific question because I need to understand a little bit more specifically. Please, you can stop by my office and my staff will help you and we can work with you to try to get you that information.
Okay.
All right. Thanks
for your time.
You're welcome. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. My name's Thad Partridge. I was a resident of San Francisco for 38 years. I was a resident. Last year, I left and moved to Oakland because it just made financial sense. Now, I was a traffic patrol person when I was in the 7th and 8th grade. So I'm sort of a compliance person. And I sit there and I see this rule in the book since 1971 that you can't sleep in your vehicle. And I feel like it's almost like rent control. If you are not forcing the compliance with what we have on the books, you're actually sort of putting people in handcuffs because then they're not changing their behavior. Why would they? You know, we have a 72-hour parking situation. Well, great. We have street cleaning once a week. So you wait 72 hours, you call the police, they'll tell you it'll take a week to get out there. Usually they're out there the next day, if not that day. I got to say that. But then they'll say, oh, we know that guy, blah, blah, blah. They just got here when they didn't. But the street cleaning is going to happen anyway. So the 72 hours really isn't effective. Andy Thornley has been fantastic working down in the Showplace area. I'm down there. My clients can't get to me. I pay $18,000 a month. It's hard to get clients in there. They're only coming once a week. They start getting freaked out. And I try to tell them, don't be freaked out. I don't see violence from these people, but how can they not feel it? So that's my thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Ariel Kelly.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Ariel Kelly, and I wanted to speak specifically about the issue of oversized vehicles and people sleeping in their cars in the Marina District, right next to Marina Safeway along the Buchanan Laguna area right across from Fort Mason. We've seen a huge increase of overnight parking and camping there. There are not, as Mr. Dodge mentioned, 8 vehicles. There's closer to 25 to 30 vehicles parking there on a regular basis. I would argue that we may be talking about 250 to 275 of RVs, but the number of people who are actually sleeping in their cars citywide is a much larger number. Most of the folks that are living in our area in their cars or RVs are elderly folks. There's one gentleman who's living in his RV with 7 Newfoundland dogs. Those dogs each weigh over 100 pounds, so there are 2 individuals living there as well as 7 very large dogs. There's a lot of folks who are sleeping in their cars. There's a gentleman who sleeps in his car over at the rec park area with his pet ferret. He's in his 30s, so not only are we seeing individuals, we're also seeing a lot of animals. And the folks who have RVs, some of them do in fact have toilet facilities on board, but a number of the folks living in vans or other cars do not. So we're seeing a huge increase in human excrement on the sidewalk on a regular basis. There is no facility, both in or around Safeway or in the rec park parking lot at Fort Mason, for any type of dumping. So we're seeing a huge increase in the amount of large garbage bags or unbagged garbage just dumped out on the street every single day. It's just overwhelming the amount of trash that DPW can actually pick up. We have a great relationship with DPW, but they're throwing their hands up in the air saying this is too much garbage. It's daily the amount of dumping that's going on, and no one is able to really manage it. I think if there is going to be a solution at Pier 80, it needs to have the facilities necessary for these folks to be able to live in their vehicles, which includes either a truck that comes in and takes out the waste and delivers water and electricity to these vehicles. But just saying we have a parking lot for you to park your vehicles is not going to be enough. I don't think that will incentivize people to want to move there. Right now, we have an entire zone in the marina of folks who there's no enforcement. So why would you leave your bayfront real estate where you can park every day, all day, with a beautiful view of the Golden Gate Bridge, why would you want to go to Pier 80 if no one's really pushing you to move? So I think the enforcement mechanism has to be there. And then the other piece that I think is very important is that most of these vehicles have handicap placards. So even though we're in a 2-hour restriction zone, and I know they mentioned for Showplace Square they're putting in a 4-hour parking zone, it doesn't matter because if you have a handicap placard, those hour time limits don't apply to you. So I would argue that that needs to be addressed. If these folks truly have valid handicap placards, they can't be forced to move out of those zones after a time limit.
Thank you, Ariel. Are there any other speakers? Please come up at this time. Come on.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Charles Nolan. I'm a resident here in San Francisco. I am a vehicle dweller. I've been living in San Francisco for about 4 years. I am a veteran, 8 years served with an honorable discharge. And unfortunately, through my own arrogance, I got myself into this predicament, like as Mr. Green had mentioned. Once you get there, it's very hard to get out of. I'm very glad I came to this meeting today because I got to hear this thing about this Pier 80. It's the first I've heard about it. But I will be the first to volunteer to do that because I believe that if you, to resolve this issue, including theirs, that the bigger picture of the humanity part of this, where there are people like Melody, who's my neighbor, a very sweet, kind lady who is in these predicaments that we can't just dump on. You can't just put a sign up and tell her to go away. Her life is getting shorter, as her partners did, who passed recently because of all the stress. I believe this Pier 80 is an excellent idea. I'll be the first to volunteer to go there. I think that...
Wait, you won't be the first. There are already 150
well,
there.
I'm saying I'm going to go talk to that gentleman right after.
You'll have company.
I'm going to ask that I participate in it because I know that if you were to treat this such as like, say, a self-help program, like you're mentioning, where the people come in with make a plan with case managers and counselors and to try to get themselves out of it, but also like a self-build program where they're helping to build this place that needs to be built for these people. You can get funding from the building department. If there's veterans involved, you can get funding from the federal government. If there's churches involved, you can get private investors to get tax write-offs. All of this can happen with just half the energy that these gentlemen have exerted already. I'm very pleased to hear you be so fervent about this topic, and I hope that I can help in any way.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on this item? If not, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. All right, public comment is closed. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for coming out this afternoon. To the city staff, thank you very much for your presentation and your thoughtful words and experience. I also want to acknowledge the Homeless Coalition. Thank you for also participating. We'll be reaching back out to the Homeless Coalition specifically on their solutions. It's really no secret that the city has had a very large and challenging history with homelessness. It's not just in my district. There are frustrations that I hear from people all across San Francisco. And I think it's incredibly important that the city continue to look at more humane solutions. And like I mentioned earlier in my comments, we are organizing a team of volunteers to be a part of the positive forces to assist with this conundrum. I don't necessarily know if we'll ever solve homelessness, but I think we certainly as a city need to do a better job of managing it. We've heard several recommendations today that I want to call into record for those that are at home watching television. We've talked a little bit about utilizing technology, particularly using spot-on parking. We've talked about safe parking lots. We've talked about parking at Pier 80 and a parking program underneath the freeway. So there are some viable options that we are chewing on and going to be analyzing. I believe that we can find compassionate, thoughtful, and an innovative way to better manage this situation. Paying attention to the vehicularly housed folks, I think it's a unique situation throughout San Francisco. We need to find places for people to be safe and in a clean location and an acceptable designated spot for them. I know many people, often through no fault of their own, fall down on their luck. You heard some of the stories here today, and they become homeless. At this time, I'm concerned about the small businesses as well that are struggling because of the feeling of unsafe from customers as well as patrons in these businesses. I hear from constituents that have been attacked. I hear from homeless community members that are also afraid. So we've got to begin to better regulate and manage this problem. And I also want to be sensitive to not taking away the limited available on-street parking that many people depend on. It's my hope that this hearing will take heed in many of the people that are here and those that are at home listening, that the seeds that will be planted here today will take root and begin to bear some fruit so that we can manage this problem. And we can take advantage of many of the talented folks that we have in our city and begin to find pathways for permanent and or transitional housing options for everyone. So, colleagues, I'd like to gavel down and file this hearing to the call of the chair. I want to see if there's any remarks that any of you would like to make. All right, seeing none, I'd like to make a motion that we file this to the call of the chair. And it looks like there's unanimous support. Thank you. Is there any other matters before this body?
That concludes our business for today.
Thank you very much, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.